Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. This is our show, and I'm glad that you guys can be with me. I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. It was a quiet one here because I am in DC. I'll be moving out of DC pretty soon, which is why I'm kind of dressed down today. Today is going to be a moving day. I don't quite know where I'm going to move to yet. I'm probably going to be on an Airbnb for a few days, or for a few weeks. But nevertheless, I'll still be doing the show 7 a.m., 10 a.m., Monday through Friday. You can be right here with me. You can join me as we, I don't know, cover international and domestic news. We have a good show for you today. I got to be honest. I was busy yesterday dealing with the moving stuff. And so I didn't necessarily get a full take on everything that was going on, but I did cover some of the news that was going on. So I was able to get Steve Gill. He'll be here at 7:30. There's news that has come out. The Economist ran the story. There were a few other places that ran the story that pointed out that Obama didn't want Harris and Pelosi didn't want Harris. And they even insinuate that Joe Biden bitterly and with a bit of spite came out and gave Harris his endorsement an hour after he said he wasn't going to run. Out of bitterness. Keep in mind, Joe Biden wanted to run, even though it was clear as day that he was not in his right mind, that he cognitively wasn't there, that he didn't have the get up and go. He could barely hold the sentence together. And yet he wanted to run, even though it was clear he understood, or at the very least, it was believed that he was going to get beat in a landslide, even bigger than Harris herself. And so the thought, or the way it's thinking, the insinuation, is that Joe Biden was pissed off, he was angry, he was humiliated. The media spent weeks asking him about his cognitive health. Sir, did you get a cognitive test? Yes, I got a cognitive test. Everything was okay. Are you sure? When was the last time you had that cognitive test? We had it 3 months ago. Well, sir, after the debate, did you feel that you needed another cognitive test? Well, you can imagine that you can't necessarily carry a campaign when you are continuously being asked about whether or not you are in your right mind. That doesn't work. Add to that the Robert Hur report, where they have it in writing that Joe Biden was not quite there, especially not quite there enough to run a political race for the presidency of the US against the man who they called Hitler. They say it was the end of democracy. And the guy who can hold back the night is Joe Biden. Geriatric. They called it a stutter. It wasn't a stutter. It was brain damage. Nevertheless, they're saying that Obama wanted someone else, either a miniature primary or something, but not Harris. Also, seeing that Harris is so much in debt, some of the reports are coming out that she reached out to people to help her with money. Now, this was the part I didn't quite understand from the very beginning. Harris had so many billionaires that was giving her money for that campaign. And even Nancy Pelosi has hundreds of millions of dollars from stocks that she was able to get while she was in Congress. Why don't these people just give Kamala Harris the money? Why don't they loan her the money? Something with all of these people, with all of this voluminous amounts of cash. And Harris is out there panhandling. I'm saying, why don't they give her the money? So some of the reports came out that said, we will give you the money if you promise not to run again. There were even some donors that were all very pissed off because from their point of view, they were being told continuously, we're even or we're winning, meaning we have an even money chance or we are winning. When they just reported, David Plouffe, that at no point in the race did their internal polling show them being ahead. So in their own assessments, they were behind Trump. Now, they could be saying this because they want to say, well, we never had a chance. Joe Biden threw us in too late. He got out the race too late. You can say all that stuff. The reality of it is, it seems like they were telling their donors, or at least some of those donors, they were telling them one thing while their polling was showing something else. That is fascinating. And the corruption doesn't necessarily end there. As you know, the roly poly man himself, Roland Martin, got $350,000. Didn't tell anybody that it was a campaign ad. He acted like it was an interview. Same thing with Al Sharpton. He got 500,000. Same thing with Harpo Productions, got 1 million. Same thing with YouTubers or TikTokers who would tell their audience, back Harris, and get a paycheck to say back Harris. And there were people who came out after the election saying, yeah, we were offered money. We didn't take it and we didn't basically go through with it. But yes, we were offered money to back Kamala Harris. These were effectively campaign ads that they didn't say were campaign ads. I guess my point is, there's a bit of issue around the fact that Kamala Harris ran the campaign in the way that she did and overspent in the way that she did. It came across as a grift. To make this even worse, if it's true, if the reports are right, that they are saying, we'll help you with the money if you don't run again. And hell, some reports even came out that said it is a disqualifying act, disqualifying for her to spend that much money and end up in the situation that she ended up. How do you get $1.5 billion and end up in debt? So Steve is going to talk about that. Also, there are reports of a question on whether or not Joe Biden should pardon Hunter Biden. Now, in the beginning, Joe Biden said he's not going to do it, but that's the guy's kid. And I don't think anybody would blame him for pardoning his kid, even though they will complain about him pardoning his kid, if you understand what I mean. Any random person would do it. But Joe Biden said he wasn't going to do it. And the reality of it is, Hunter Biden could go to jail. The tax crimes that he's being charged with in California are not a gimme. I mean, the idea that you would be that much of an elitist, where it is clear that they are trying to get rid of this case on you. And they say, we're going to combine everything into one case. And as we combine everything into one case, we're going to take it to the judge. And the judge asks, wait a minute, are you going to bring fair charges or any other charges later? Now, the deal, Hunter Biden's attorney was right. That deal was supposed to get rid of all of the cases. But you can imagine that if you're the court or if you're the prosecutor, it's kind of humiliating when the judge is asking you, well, what about fair charges? He is obviously guilty of fair charges. And so the prosecution says, well, maybe we might bring charges later on. Now, truth be told, Hunter Biden's attorneys have a damn good point on this. The idea that we are going to agree that we committed some crime, whatever that crime is, and in agreeing to this crime, you can now hit us for another crime later on. Well, no, we're not going to agree to that. Everything needs to be included. I guess my point is, they clearly were trying to give you a pass. And the fact that they let that charge go for 5 years, it was clear that they didn't want to bring that charge. They were kind of embarrassed into bringing that charge. Hunter Biden was like, well, I don't want to be charged for anything. I didn't do anything. I was above it all. Despite the fact that, the crack, the prostitutes, the hookers and all this other stuff, the partying. I mean, he got millions of dollars and spent millions on partying and everything else. And then you have all of these charges that came up, tax crimes and everything else. His sugar bro ends up paying for that, which is nice. Everybody should have their own sugar bro. But that's not necessarily going to stop the state from going. So the question is pardon Hunter Biden? Kid, I would imagine if it's his kid, he's probably going to do it. Who knows? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that pans out. The other big issue that's happening right now is a second front. Can I say second front? A new front in a global war. I think Putin is right that this is beginning to take on a global character, because the events are not, each war that's happening around the globe is not isolated. So the war in Ukraine, obviously, the European powers and the United States are fully and completely invested in that war. And some reports are coming out, at the very least from Russian intelligence, that they believe that Western forces are trying to put 100,000 troops in Western Ukraine in order to freeze the conflict. Because what they know is that Ukraine is failing miserably and don't have the manpower in order to hold the line. Not only manpower, they don't even have the weaponry to do so. And so the thought is, well, if we put troops in Ukraine, then Russia wouldn't dare attack those troops in Ukraine. And we, at that point, can build up the Ukrainian military again. And once we build it up, they can relaunch attacks in the Russia. Now, this is outlandish. If they honestly believe this, they've lost their minds. They have effectively gone insane. Um, if they honestly believe that Russia is going to allow them to invade Western Ukraine, rebuild a military in Western Ukraine in order to attack Russia, they are they have really lost it. Meaning, this war has made them utterly deranged. The degenerates that are in Washington, or for that matter, in European capitals, that have no legitimacy, by the way. I mean, again, Macron has lost one election after the next, or his party has. He is viscerally hated, and he has fundamentally destroyed that country. Same thing with Germany. The German government has literally collapsed on that question of funding Ukraine. Because somebody asked the most pertinent question in the world: is the money that we're giving going to change anything that's happening on the ground? And the answer, of course, was no. No. And so they were like, okay, so why are we doing this? Why are we continuously putting more money into this if it's not going to change the context on the ground? Well, we have to support Ukraine. Okay, we need to stop this. No. In which case the government collapses, and they will be having an election apparently next year in 2025, an election that Schultz will not win. So there's that. And then you get Joe Biden, lame duck in the US, that was too cognitively damaged to run, where his own party cannibalized him to keep him from running. These are the people and groups and countries that are deciding to bring the world to the brink of oblivion. These goofballs, these goblins and idiots, these are the people, these degenerates are the people who are leading these countries, despite the fact that they have no mantle from the standpoint of the public will to do this. And if you went to the public and asked them, hey, person in democratic country, are you on board for this? Are you okay with them bringing this world to the blink of oblivion for Ukraine? And I'm saying for Ukraine because that is what they're using as their justification of this. But the reality of it is, this has really less to do about Ukraine and more to do about their own ego, hubris, and this idea of Western hegemony eroding. They can't accept the fact that this is a multipolar world, and they are clinging to this idea of unipolarity. And what's sad about this is that the European countries, Angela Merkel in her memoir pointed out that it seemed that the United States was perfectly fine with destroying economies, even of their allies. And I will point out that the destruction of Nord Stream 2 was that, the destruction of the German economy, or for that matter, the European economies. Look at what has happened to Europe, this garden, as they call it, when corporations and companies in Europe have a hard time functioning because they can't afford the energy in Europe. Because again, they were getting that energy from Russia. Meaning Europe was only Europe because its relationship with Russia. And when that relationship was damaged, and when the energy production and all of those things eroded, so went Europe on top of it. So there's that. And another front, you have Georgia. Georgia, I've been to Tbilisi, beautiful country, beautiful people, but they are in chaos right now. The pro-Europe group apparently lost the election, and that group starts screaming, election fraud. There was fraud. There was fraud. All right. Show me the fraud. Well, we can't really show you the fraud, but we feel that there was fraud. And if America, with all of its powers, can show you the fraud, then we can't really show it to you either. But we feel it. We deeply feel it. Okay, this is nonsense. The issue boils down to Western powers wanting to create a second front against Russia. Now, what's wild about this is they wanted to pass a fair law. Now, understand the US has a fair law. We've been prosecuting people with that fair law. And you have to ask, well, wait a minute, why is the US and Europe taking such a hard stance against Georgia for passing the same law that the US has at their disposal? And the obvious is clear. The fair law is meant to know who is putting money into your politics. Because think about it. If you had another country, another element, a corporation, or whatever else that decides we want to dump $100 million into your elections to augment, to change, to permutate, or create a perturbation in what would typically take place in your politics that may not be in the best interest of your country, but is in our best interest. Okay, well, any random country that is a sovereign country would want to know that. Of course, I want to know if you have your own agenda and you're dumping money into my country in order to affect my politics. You know, looking at you, the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and the other Jewish or Israeli organizations. I mean, they call themselves Jewish organizations, but ultimately they're working for the best interests of Israel, not the best interests of America. I guess my point is you will want to know that. That should be something that it should be clear if they're doing that. So Georgia says, okay, wait a minute. You guys are pitching a fit at this. Why are you so peed off at us doing this? We are just looking to safeguard the integrity of our elections, just like America was looking to safeguard the integrity of their elections. And yet they pitched a fit. All right. Well, they lost that race, meaning the ones who were against the fair law, they lost. The nationalist government won. And ever since, you've had protests after protests after protests, many of which turn semi-violent against the government. And apparently the government is putting a stall on European membership. And so, of course, they freaked out, and you end up with a situation with more protests, NGOs dumping money into it, and it begins to look a lot like Ukraine. What I mean by that is, for instance, this. The cops are super engaged. And I would say the one thing about the fact that this yeah, that's Georgia right now. That's Georgia. Utter and entire chaos, complete chaos. And again, this stuff isn't happening in a vacuum. Here's some more of it. It's not happening in a vacuum. When I had the guest on, he pointed out that they wanted to use Georgia as a second front. That the fact that Ukraine wasn't going well, and because Ukraine wasn't going well, it was obvious that Ukraine was losing or has lost this war at this point, that they wanted to open a second front to effectively use Georgia to also go against Russia. Now, the government, after seeing what happened to Ukraine, I would imagine they're probably against this, and against this in a very, resistance standpoint. The public itself also can see with their own eyes what happened to Ukraine in regards to the coup that took place where they overthrew the democratically elected government. What I'm pointing out here, though, is the reason they overthrew the Ukrainian government and when that happened. They wanted Ukraine to sign on to a trade agreement with Europe. The trade agreement was not in the best interest of Ukraine. And Yanukovych, the president at the time, the democratically elected government, head of that government at the time, said, we will pause this. Meaning he didn't even reject it, just we'll pause it. And within a very short time after that, you have Newland giving cookies, Yulin having a conversation about F the EU and the people that they were going to install in the government itself. You got the violent coup, this violent overthrow of the democratically elected government, the democratic order of that country. And I'm pointing out that Georgia, it seems that they're trying to do something similar with Georgia, not necessarily a trade agreement, but to try to get them closer to the EU. And when the government has been somewhat resistant against that, protests, protests, protests. Color revolution seems to be the thing. The main front, though, that has recently opened up is Syria. If you look at it, Russian forces are in Syria. They've been there ever since the overthrow of the government of Bashar al-Assad failed. Bashar al-Assad welcomed Iran and Russia into the government or into the country in order to prevent the overthrow of that government from ISIS and terrorist forces, many of which were backed by the West, including Turkey, which was a big proponent of those terrorist groups trying to overthrow the Syrian government. Right now, many of those countries have a hand in this conflict. And it just re-erupted where you have terrorists. Al-Nusra, they've changed their names so often. The Free Syrian Army, the Al-Nusra Front, they changed it to something else now. I don't know the new name of it. I forget the new name of it, but whatever. A bunch of terrorist groups pushed by Turkey, Israel, and the United States attacking Syria, Aleppo specifically. Bashar al-Assad, Russian government, and Iran have been fighting back, and apparently even Hezbollah, reports are anyway, have sent a contingent in order to push back the terrorist groups. Now, the reason that Israel, Turkey, working hand in hand and doing this, at the very least from an Israeli standpoint, is they believe, and they're true, that Syria is a gateway for weapons and assistance to come into Lebanon. And so their thought is now that we were able to get this ceasefire, quote unquote, with Hezbollah. And by the way, Netanyahu doesn't consider it a ceasefire. Netanyahu, in a recent speech, pointed out that the deal allows them to wage all-out war. He was very clear, the war has not stopped. This just allows us to use this to wage war right here. This. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we would take advantage of the ceasefire. I did not say the end of the war. In case there is violence of the outline, we will go to full-scale war. Now, if you remember the questions that I asked yesterday when I was talking to Esteban, how do you have a situation where everybody in the negotiation is either backed by or controlled by America and Israel, and yet you get a deal? It didn't make sense to me. What I mean by that is Amos Hochstein, or Hochstein, whatever, however you want to pronounce it, he is a dual citizen of Israel, so there's that. He was an IDF soldier, so there's that. And Joe Biden used him to be the negotiator for the conflict. Now, again, how do you have somebody who is an IDF soldier negotiating on behalf of America? That's the first point. But to make this even worse, the IDF was killing civilian population in order to blackmail Hezbollah to take that deal. And it wasn't even Hezbollah, it was Lebanese government, but the Lebanese government was negotiating on behalf of Hezbollah in a certain sense. The Lebanese government, who didn't fire a shot in anger at the genocidal maniac country that invaded their country. And so, like, these were the people that were supposed to be doing the negotiations. And so my thing was, okay, so what if Israel doesn't leave? What if the 60 days pass and they stay? And right now, the people who I've talked to who are on the ground, they pointed out that Israel was shooting at anything that moved. and that they were not abiding by the ceasefire. I mean, hell, they even put in um, a curfew, which is like, how does that work? How are you doing that? How are you the force that was party to the conflict, murdering people in mass, and yet you're still somehow making arrangements of what is happening on the ground? Supposedly, the Lebanese military was supposed to take over. But my thing was always, if they don't leave, then what? The US has given Israel a blank check. The Lebanese government has done nothing to back or push Israel out in any sense. It was only Hezbollah. And an argument can be made that Hezbollah was able to resist what Israel wanted to do because what they wanted to do was take the South. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Hezbollah wasn't damaged in that process because they accepted a deal under terms that were not that great. When you really think about it, who was negotiating in real terms for their best interests or for the best interests of the Lebanese people? You can't say it was the Lebanese government, considering the Lebanese government is in the pocket of America. And so we'll see how this unfolds. But the way Netanyahu is thinking about it is we can declare all out war on any provocation, and the war has not ended. Now, America would quibble with that and say, well, that's not the way we understood this deal to be. But considering that you've given them a blank check across the board for everything else, why would he think differently? My point is, this is another front in what seems to be an evolving world war. If major conflict breaks out between Russia and NATO forces, meaning they are directly firing at each other, right now, Russia has not taken the bait of attacking a NATO nation. If they put troops in, those troops will get hit, full stop. All of these places that seem to be disparate fights will merge. Now, the interesting part in this is Turkey. Erdogan has bitterly complained about Israel for the past year. Oh, we may send troops to Israel. Oh, we may do this. We're very angry. Oh, I'm very angry at the Jewish state. He's like Hitler. And yet is joining forces with him in Syria. Think about that. Meaning for all of the complaints and bitterness and fist shaking that Erdogan was doing, when it came down to it, who he actually ended up helping was Israel to attack Syria. Just outrageous. Right now, Russia has been doing a hell of a bombing campaign to protect the integrity of the state. And Iran apparently is also there. But again, they were invited. When the US backed terrorist laws, we decided to hold on to the wheat and to the oil with the idea that we can undermine the Syrian government by stealing the revenue of that country. Meaning, if we steal the major resources of that country, we can somehow undermine the government and prevent that country from re-emerging out of the conflict. That was their plan. That's what they did. And so you had multiple countries, Turkey, the US, Russia, all with their own patch of land in Syria. It was always a cluster. And it was always this question of when was this going to reignite? The terrorists were hiding. I mean, you can't even say hiding because everybody knew they were there in Idlib to the tune of tens of thousands. And even the UN understood that they were in Idlib. And not just understood they were in Idlib, the US even came out and argued that if anybody attacks them, we will respond. So we were effectively protecting the terrorists as they fled into Idlib province. Just outrageous. Either way, this is another front that is kicked off in this kind of what seems to be this global conflict that is popping off. People need to be very clear. China right now is the Goliath that hasn't necessarily got involved in any of this stuff, but I have a hard time believing that if a direct war with Russia takes place, that China is going to be on the sideline, considering China has said we are closer than allies and has even been having military exercises with Russia proper. So to call it chaos is an understatement. And the idea that we're putting so much money into this stuff is just outrageous. They don't want to accept it's a multipolar world. And until they do, we will be at the brink of a knife's edge, dancing on the edge of oblivion. Putin recently was at the CTSO and he gave several speeches. In one of those speeches, he pointed out that Donald Trump is not safe. That if Trump wanted to end the war, that his safety may be on the line in him doing so. Now, this was discussed a few times once before with this thought that Ukraine had more to do with Donald Trump's assassination than the media would have really wanted to go into, considering that the guy that did it had worked in Ukraine and was a Ukraine acolyte. Okay, I want to show this clip. I'm sorry, this is a hard pivot. In the old days, if you would have said that this was a proxy war, they would say, oh, you're a Putin puppet and you are given Putin's line on this stuff. If you would have said that this was about NATO expansion, they would have said, oh, you're just repeating Russian propaganda. Now, today at this point, you've even had Joseph Borrell point out, not Borrell, yeah, Borrell himself even point out, this is about NATO expansion. That's what the war was about. That's what all of this was about. And you even get today, mophead, liar, degenerate himself, the man that is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, finally come out and said the quiet part out loud.
Proxy war, but we're not giving our proxies the ability to do the job. And for years and years now, we've been allowing them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs, and it has been cruel.
Think about that for a moment. Russia has just launched the Rezhnik, and that weapon outmatches, basically has the force of a nuclear weapon, but it's a conventional warhead. It burns apparently at 4,000 degrees Celsius, and moved at speeds of Mach 10. They have weapons that are beyond that. One weapon they call Satan, which is a nuclear warhead that also is a hypersonic missile that can hit anywhere in the world. Why, like the idea that he's having this conversation saying, well, we let them fight with one arm tied behind their back. Russia literally did not introduce their weapon systems of that caliber into this conflict. So at no point were they fighting with this idea of trying to just obliterate Ukraine in the way that we were obliterating Iraq, for example. There were military reasons for the things that they effectively hit. What Johnson doesn't get is something that Joe Biden actually did get, and some of the reporting. They pointed out that what Joe Biden was concerned about was that if Russia was on the brink of losing, that they would do any and everything in their power to win. Meaning, from the Russian point of view, it was existential. And the US understood that it was existential. And because the US understood it was existential from the Russian perspective, that the US realized that they could only go so far. And so they didn't go into this conflict with this idea of, we're going to give you everything in the world to win. It wasn't that. It was, we're going to stick it to the Russians. We're going to damage Russia. If Ukraine can win on their own, great. But we can't have our fingerprints on doing anything to force it where they will win. Meaning, we can't give Ukraine nuclear weapons. Giving Ukraine Tomahawk missiles may make Russia pissed off and may take them to a level that we, as the West, don't want to go. Now, Boris Johnson may be too stupid to realize this, but the reality of it is the objective was, yes, they wanted to beat Russia militarily, economically, and all that stuff. But by the same token, they understood that there were limits to which they would go that would potentially end the world. Boris Johnson, what he's saying here is partially true. It is cruel um, to basically send them out there as a proxy into a war where you know, A, most likely they're going to lose, and B, if you're, let's say, the White House, that there were limits to how far you were willing to go in regards to pushing them out there to do it, despite the fact in all of your speeches, we're with you for as long as it takes. The rub is regardless of what your limits were in the beginning, you sleepwalk into larger escalations. Meaning, regardless of what your intent was and how you started this, well, we can only do this. We can only go this far. We can only give them, well, we can't give them airplanes. Well, we can't give them tanks. Well, we can't give them this. We can only go to this limit. But then you get this continuous escalation. And the more you invest into it from the standpoint of your political capital, the more you invest into it from the standpoint of this, even this idea of ego and hubris, or this idea of Western hegemony in and of itself, at a certain point, it becomes, oddly enough, esoterically existential for NATO and the other countries that make up NATO. Meaning the hostile military organization itself, on some level, is almost the experiential representation of Western power. And if it loses, then there becomes a question to the credibility of that organization. Meaning, whatever you started off in the beginning with, it escalates and escalates and escalates to the point where you sleepwalk further and further into potentially a world war. And Boris Johnson, who's never been given credit for being the smartest or sharpest tool in the bunch, he may not know that. He may be unaware of that. And to be honest, neocons often would throw their country into things without a clear recognition of whether they had the capability of doing it. Keep in mind, he's saying this when Britain has been cutting down their military spending. They've been decommissioning ships. And so his argument is we should have gotten further involved, despite the fact that Brits don't have a military that can fill a doghouse, let alone win a war. They do have nukes. But again, any nuclear war that you have is effectively a loss. There's no way to win a nuclear war. Sure, you can have one Brit standing, but I don't necessarily think that Pyrrhic victory is a victory at all. You destroyed the world. Meaning any win that takes place has to take place in a conventional sense. The moment that you go to nuclear war, it's all fail. It's all loss. The world loses in that contest. So I don't know what Boris Johnson is talking about. He sounds like a lot of these other deranged leaders that either don't believe hell is hot, don't believe the stove will burn you, and is willing to push and push and push, believing in some level of esteem. I don't know what it's based on. I don't even know what it's backed by. This is the goofball that got them into Brexit, where the British economy has effectively tanked. And Johnson, who's a prolific liar, known as a prolific liar, went out there and told those people, we're going to be great. We're going to be Fortress Britain and all this other nonsense. None of that stuff came to pass. None of it came to pass. And if you ask people today in Britain, would you prefer to stay as opposed to go? The majority would say this Brexit was a mistake. I'm saying that goofball is still out here saying this nonsense. Keep in mind, Boris Johnson was the one that was deployed into Ukraine when they had the Istanbul agreements, and they had figured out, okay, this is what we can agree on. And one of those things was Ukraine would be a neutral country. That was the main thing. That was the main point of the war. That was one of the main things that they had got agreement on. Boris tells him, you will get no security guarantees from the West. None. And not just no security guarantees from the West. We don't support this deal, in which case the deal was scrapped. Boris Johnson said, we're going to give you all the money and the weapons that you need. Go out there and die and fight to the last dead Ukrainians. At this point, the majority of Ukrainians don't want the war. The majority don't want the war. And despite the fact that the majority, based on Gallup polling, don't want to be involved in this war, these guys are still trying to escalate further, with Joe Biden coming out saying, send your kids to die. Send your babies to get shot in the face. That's what we need to do. Send your kids out to die. You have a manpower shortage, send your children out to die. Now, Ukraine came back and said, well, we need more weapons. We don't have enough weapons in order to make this work. Okay, yeah, but mainly it's a manpower shortage and a weapon shortage. Both of those things are problematic. And to show how bad the manpower shortage is, you have scenes like this taking place on the ground in Ukraine. Look at this. This is Ukraine. And this scene has been replicated over and over and over again all throughout Ukraine. It's gut-wrenching. I can't imagine the situation where you've lost hundreds of thousands of your people, where the president that presided over the loss of hundreds of thousands of your people got in on a peace ticket. And you've lost so many people that they have started snatching people off the street. What you're seeing here is recruiters, quote unquote, snatching a man off the street, throwing him in a van while, I don't know if his mom or his wife is fighting like hell to try to keep him from being snatched and dragged and thrown to the front lines where he would most likely be killed. Her anger, palpable. And this scene has been shown over and over and over. You see them fighting on the bus, them dragging people out of dance clubs, them dragging people off the street, and immediately throw them into a van, beat them up, throw them into a van, send them to the front lines. And this woman is obviously angry because she knows that that guy is most likely going to die. Zelensky is presiding over this. There's a reason why Zelensky is not having elections, because he would lose those elections. And the person who would win those elections will most likely end this war. That's what you're getting all throughout Ukraine. It's just outrageous, just completely outrageous. I want to switch to another issue. Well, before I get to that, Putin is at CSTO. It's kind of like a NATO of former Soviet states. And he points out that Trump will not be safe or may not be safe if Trump tries to end the war. That there's so much money and political clout invested in that war that in the same way that two people tried to whack Trump the first time around, that somebody may try to do it again. Now, the truth be told, the guy, I can't think of his name, but the original guy that tried to kill Trump, that almost killed him, or the second guy that was sitting out at the golf course trying to kill Trump, that guy did have connections to Ukraine. He was in Ukraine, got back into the United States, was felon for all in general, and they kind of skirted the fact of his Ukrainian ties under the rug, despite the fact that that might have been one of his main motivations for trying to kill Trump. And so when Putin is saying this, he's not necessarily saying this in a vacuum. More interesting is this one, where he's talking about Joe Biden. Let's play it. Let's play this one. He's bringing up Joe Biden, and he's pointing out that Joe Biden seems to be escalating before Trump gets in office. Let's play the clip.
If President Biden thinks that by escalating the confrontation, he does anything to help the future administration to go out easily out of the situation. Maybe the future president will said, it's not me, it's those lunatics who were in power before me. Well, that's one option. Maybe there is a version that the current administration does everything to create more difficulties to make life as hard as possible for the future administration. Well, that's possible. But as far as I see that, President Trump, a smart and experienced person, will come up with a solution, especially given that he has gone through quite an ordeal of fighting to reclaim the Oval Office.
Okay, that's a lot of flattering that's taking place. Trump, he's a smart man. He's went through all of that. Maybe he can come up to a deal. Effectively saying, look, I know that Joe Biden is trying to keep this war going, but Trump may come up with something else in order to find a way to end it. I don't know. Who knows? Donald Trump apparently has been in conversation with Mexico leader Sheinbaum, I believe her name, Sheinbaum. Yeah, Sheinbaum. Especially when it came up about the migrants and the tariffs that Donald Trump was supposed to apply to Mexico and Canada, and for that matter, China. And apparently they had a conversation. So he clearly is having conversations with world leaders when it fits or suits. Who knows if there's been a conversation between Putin and Trump in general? Since he's won the election, I have no idea. Nothing has come up. He has been very quiet on this. One of Donald Trump's picks has pointed out that he thinks that Joe Biden's escalation might work into Donald Trump's hands because you are escalating to such an extent, almost like a good cop, bad cop, that Trump comes in and he's able to have more leeway to negotiate. Kellogg, I believe, said that. I think Kellogg is out of his mind. Initially, Kellogg did point out that Ukraine would have to give up territory. So at the very least, he's on the right front for that because Russia is not giving up their territory. Those territories are part of the Russian Federation at this point under their own constitution. And again, Trump is coming into a context where we lied about the Minsk agreements. We blew off the Istanbul agreements. We've given hundreds of billions of dollars to kill as many Russians as possible, using Ukraine as proxy to do so. So you can imagine that's this idea of having leeway is probably a no. They gave their terms, and they're probably going to stick with their terms. Now, what Trump does and how he ends it, that's assuming he even tries to end it. I have no idea. The fact that Trump hasn't said anything is somewhat deafening to me, especially considering the escalation that Joe Biden has taken forth. If Mark is right, and I don't see why he wouldn't necessarily be right, and the Western powers are continuing to escalate, it is very possible that one of those escalations, meaning one step on that ladder, maybe we're putting troops in Ukraine. And you may have different countries carving up different elements of Ukraine that they plan on taking and holding onto. I have no idea. As I said, I am not the most optimistic about what this looks like either during Biden's remaining 2 months, or for that matter, even when Trump gets in, because I don't necessarily know what's in Trump's mind. Trump can say anything. He lies as easily as he breathes. So if he needs to tell people, yes, I'm going to end the war, then he will tell people that. If Trump needs to tell people, tell Arabs, I'm going to end the war, then yes, he will tell them that. Whether he would go through with it or not, I have no idea. From my point of view, people are policy. And the people, the kooks and lunatics that Donald Trump has put into some positions in his government is just outrageous, especially and not well suited to end any war. I mean, Gabbard, RFK Jr., even Trump Jr., they've said this stuff about neocons and stopping wars and that type of stuff. The rest, not so much. Putting Marco Rubio in as Secretary of State is effectively having Antony Blinken in as Secretary of State, or putting some of these other people in. Kellogg is an interesting choice. I know what they've been saying about him. But some of his other statements on this are not as hawkish, I suppose, as some of the other people Donald Trump has put into his administration. I am in a wait and see mood on this stuff, and I'll see what happens. I mean, like I said, I'm not necessarily the most optimistic. I strongly believe that Kamala Harris would have ended us in a world war. I don't, she is so ideologically driven that the same thing that Keir Starmer was like, well, we have to stick with Ukraine. Even to the expense of our countries, we have to stay with Ukraine. We'll see. The fact that Donald Trump hasn't said anything on it, I don't know if that's good or bad. I would say the kooks that he's put into various positions, that is decisively bad. Let's talk about UFOs for a moment. There has been a lot of talk about UFOs hovering over an air base in the UK. It's a US base. And in the reporting on it, they actually have video footage of it. And they even have video footage of it touching down on the ground. And it's not really even on the ground, just kind of hovering. It's, I don't know what the propulsion is. It doesn't look like a typical drone, even though it's being called a drone. So by definition, it is a UFO. It's weird because this has been flying over the bases for a while now. It's even been interrupting some of the flights. This is what it looked like when it touched down on the ground. This. It's like a little ball or something. Okay, what's going on with this? There we are. It's like a little ball or something. It's not even on the ground. It's hovering. It's producing a shadow. Apparently, when they got close to it, it shot up in the air and took off. I'm trying to see if I have another picture of it. No, this is a different one. But this thing and something like it has been screwing with the flights on the US Air Base in the UK. And like I said, when they tried to get close to it, the thing just took off. I'm trying to see if there's another picture of this. Okay, here we go. Here's another picture. Because at one point it was in the sky. There it is. It's just hovering. And then at one point it landed. And then it took off again. And it's been doing this for the last, week or so. They have no idea what it is. They have no idea where it came from. They don't even know how it's moving, meaning the propulsion system that's associated with it. Nobody's saying aliens. Some people are saying aliens. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, look, my thing for the UFO stuff, as you know, I was the UFO correspondent for the network. I would only go as far as I can defend, meaning you wouldn't necessarily have me saying like aliens are eating people or anything like that. There are larger questions that go around on this issue, especially with some of the things that have come out from the US government, whether it was the Director of National Intelligence producing those reports, effectively getting all of the organization of the US government saying this is real, this is legitimate, this is not interdimensional fish, this is actually technology. The problem and the dilemma comes in is because it's hard to believe that another country around the globe will have a certain level of breakaway technology that so far exceeds anything else that we've seen, but has not been deployed anywhere else. Meaning, where are the sciences to back that up? Where are the metallurgy to back that up? Where are all of these other things that you would expect to go into this particular product being put out and used in such a way? And so this notion that it's Chinese or it's Russian, it's kind of hard for people to wrap their head around, in which case they say, well, it's not them and it's not us. At that point, it becomes, okay, so what is it? Where is it coming from? Where is this originating from? When you get various people who are looking into this, let's say part of ATIP and some of those organizations, they were pretty clear that this is real. And not just this is real, they've been able to map some of the characteristics of the various ships and the sizes of those ships. Elizondo seems to know something, even though Elizondo is under orders not to say anything. I even question, where does he work? Meaning, is he currently employed? And if so, who is he employed by? Because Elizondo has been seemingly running a script. And if it's a script, it's not a script by himself. Also, you get this thing where there was something over the White House, apparently last night, where you also had all of these, I don't know what they were, craft, drones, something. They were so high up in the sky, it was kind of hard to see, but they were in this kind of formation over Washington, D.C. I did not see it. I did not go outside to see it. I didn't even see it until later when it was being reported. Something weird is going on. We don't know what it is, but at the very least, they're not coming out what it is. There's this belief that various companies have access to some of these products in order to use it for technological advancement. And part of the benefit of doing that is that if you look into, let's say, FOIA or something like that, FOIA is not going to come back with anything because those things are part of a private corporation. So if Lockheed Martin is holding on to some kind of materials, Lockheed Martin doesn't have to tell you that they're holding on to the materials. What makes this even weirder is that the federal government has been looking into this because it seems like it's taking place outside of the eyeshot of the federal government. Meaning, however this is being run, however the money is being given to these programs, these special access programs, this stuff is not necessarily in the eyesight of Congress. And so when Congress is trying to pass legislation for eminent domain laws to go into corporations and take technology, you have other elements of Congress saying, nope, we're not going to do that. And they get a lot of money to put a block on legislation doing that. So what you end up with is a watered down, let's say, legislation, part of the National Defense Authorization Act, watered down. Now, the people who Trump have put into his administration, John Ratcliffe, what is the other guy? Marco Rubio. These people were very strong on the UFO issue. Very strong. I mean, Marco Rubio passed some of the, put some of the strongest language in him, Gillibrand, etc., on this topic, on the subject matter. Will something change? Ratcliffe went so far as to confirm, yes, there's weird phenomena that our pilots have been encountering that we don't quite know what it is. And Ratcliffe even went so far as to say, I tried to get that stuff outed in the public. There's too much classification around it. But my tenure was up before I could get that stuff released. This is bringing it back to the forefront. And the question really does boil down to, what is it? And whether or not the people who are in Trump administration are going to push him in a particular direction towards declassification. I don't know. This was another one that was seen recently. Now, I'm fascinated by this one because I've seen stuff like this. So I was in Egypt with my, okay, those people are freaking out. I was in Egypt with my ex-wife. And we had just gotten to the airport. We just left the airport. It was late at night. And I had the tendency to look up at the sky. Always fascinated by stuff in the sky, so I tended to look up. And as I was looking up at the sky, I saw something that looked like this. Like this little light. And so I started thinking at the light. You could think at it. Oftentimes, even in the literature from like Elizondo and some of those people that were looking into it, they believe that there's a conscious connection between the two, that somehow consciousness plays a role in it. So I was thinking at the light. As thinking at the light, it turned from a tiny light. Okay, they're using a laser. They're hitting it with a laser, but whatever. It turned into a tiny light and started to blow up to look like a sun. Let's see if I can find it. It started to do that. Come on, that. It was blowing up to the size of like a miniature sun. And I remember freaking out is the wrong word for it. Excited is probably more the right word for it. And I immediately turned to my ex, hey, look at this. And immediately when she turns her head around, it's gone. Immediately when she turns her head around, it's gone. Yeah. All right. That's my spiel for the UFO stuff. I'm not going to belabor this point. This is one of those issues that I'm fascinated by. And there should be more clarity on this issue. And up to this point, the clarity has not necessarily been shown by this government. I'm also curious on why. Okay. I'm going to take a break. Steve Gill was supposed to be here at 7:30. Steve Gill did not show up. And now Steve Gill is communicating with me. So let me do this. I'm going to have a guest come on at 8:15, Steve Kuzmarov. There is a lot to talk about with Steve, everything from Syria to Putin's speech and some of the things that he said at that speech, not to mention the color revolution taking place in Georgia. There is a lot to talk about with Steve Kuzmarov. He is the guy who works with, D&D politics or something like that. I'll get his bio in when he comes in, but Steve has been a really good guest and a really good friend of the show. And when we changed over to doing the show independently, he stayed with me on it. So I definitely appreciate him doing so. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to do some house cleaning. I'll be back in a moment. Come on. Come on. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I definitely appreciate all of you for joining me on this episode, day after Thanksgiving, and I hope you guys had a damn good Thanksgiving. I just talked to Steve. I'm going to see if he could join me at 9:30. We have Yakov Shapiro, who's going to join at 9 o'clock. That man is astonishingly good. You are going to enjoy that. That is something not to be missed. We also have Jeremy Kuzmarov coming on at 8:15. He should be here in about 10 minutes. All of these people are damn good at their craft. If you guys really dig the content and you find yourself coming back here more often, definitely hit like, share the content, subscribe to it. You can always support this work through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chat stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. I may be ending the show a little bit early today. I have movers coming into the house. They're effectively trashing the house. I often said that I wanted a restart or to minimize my life. Well, that is definitely going to happen. So all of this is going to be taken out. Everything in this house is going to be trashed with the exception of my light, my computer, my TV, and whatever else will fit into an Airbnb. And that will be that. You will see me, however, Monday morning. I don't know where I'm going to be Monday morning, and I don't know what the premises is going to look like, but I will be here still 7 a.m., 10 a.m., Monday through Friday. Recently, the ICC Criminal Court issued the arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Now, it shouldn't have taken that long. It should have been very clear at the point where you're starving a population, when you're shooting kids in the back, when you're shooting kids in the head, when you're shooting people wearing a press jersey, when you're shooting UN workers, when you're doing all of this chaos and havoc. And it's like, no, we're just fighting Hamas. How does it look like you're fighting Hamas when you've destroyed 70% of all of the infrastructure of Gaza? Meaning you have utterly demolished that place. You are bombing tents. You are bombing kids. You are starving the local population. Even the U.S., who says contradictory things, if you look at what they're doing and not what they're saying, it gets across that they are starving the local population. I'll give you an example. Why build a pier, right? I mean, the entire point of, well, we're going to build a pier in order to get supplies into Gaza. Okay, well, you're giving Israel $20-30 billion. You're giving them all the weapons. You've given them a blank check. And you have no influence to ensure that people get food? Are you serious? Or maybe are you just in on it? And then you go to the other part where the U.S. says, we give you 30 days to make an adjustment. Either you allow those people to eat, or else we may change our mind in regards to continuously arming you. Now, keep in mind, this is against our own laws, meaning the Biden administration is breaking the law on several fronts. A, it is understood that Israel has nuclear weapons. They are not part of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. We shouldn't be arming them. We shouldn't be engaging them in the way they were engaging them. And the starvation thing, again, breaks our laws. The idea that we're continuously giving them weapons and humanitarian aid, and the humanitarian aid is not getting to the people who needs it, well, that is against U.S. law. We bypass it. We ignore it. And so my point is, why do you need to give them 30 days to make sure 300 trucks, which, by the way, is still not enough. I think the total was like 600 trucks that were needed. But whatever. The Biden administration says you need to have at least 300 trucks coming in. They had less than 30. So how is the Biden administration making this argument that they're not starving the civilian population when they themselves are putting out edicts that would indicate that they're starving the population? This was not a war against Hamas. This was a war against the population. And what's wild about it is when the arrest warrant came through, outrage, utter outrage. How dare you say that they are murdering the civilian population, it's starving the civilian population. How dare you say this is a crime against humanity? If this is not a crime against humanity, if this is not a genocide, then there is no such thing as genocide. Lindsey Graham, who has never found a war that he didn't like, never found an Arab that he wasn't okay with being killed, he comes out and says something that is fundamentally true, even though it's ghastly. He is arguing effectively that the International Criminal Court wasn't made for countries like the US. It wasn't made for places like Israel. That it doesn't apply in those places. And by the way, it does. As a flat fact, does. Palestine is part of the Rome Statute. And a country that is part of the Rome Statute, if something is happening to that country, the country that is doing it is also grandfathered in. So when the United States was attacking Afghanistan, for example, Afghanistan is part of the Rome Statute. It's part of the International Criminal Court. And so the court has jurisdiction to investigate U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan because it was part of the Rome Statute. Palestine also. Now, the U.S. would try to make this argument, well, they're not a country, and so they don't really apply. It's like, okay, so A, you're blocking them from being a country because you and Israel are the only two. Some other rando place might join in on this, but you're really the only two that's standing against A, a ceasefire, but B, also standing against it becoming a country. Israel went through the United Nations to become a country. Why not Palestine? And so not only are you saying, well, they're not party to it because they're not, a country, you're preventing them from being a country, A, and now you're standing against the ICC doing their job. It's one thing, for example, the ICC went after, they put an arrest warrant on Putin. Ukraine is not part of the Rome Statute. Russia is not part of the Rome Statute. US is not part of the Rome Statute. And I would argue no country that is a superpower would be a part of it in real terms because they don't want to be limited in action by this. They went after Putin because he was taking kids out of a war zone. Just outrageous. This case, it's an actual genocide. You are literally killing people en masse, indiscriminately. And if you remember, at the very end when the ceasefire was being declared by Lebanon, well, I'll say Hezbollah because Lebanon didn't fire a bullet in anger, not even one. But Hezbollah and Israel went on a killing spree to kill as many Lebanese as they possibly could before the ceasefire went into effect. Now, that is just disgusting behavior. Like, that is a level of racist hatred that is difficult to fathom. My point is, Lindsey Graham is saying that's fair game, that you shouldn't, and the court is wrong for putting an arrest warrant out for war criminals. I'll let Lindsey himself make his point. I'm not even going to make a homophobic joke about Lindsey Graham. I'm going to keep this directly on the subject matter. Lindsey Graham telling people that it's wrong, that the ICC wasn't meant for Israel.
The statute doesn't apply to Israel or the United States or France or Germany or Great Britain because it wasn't conceived to come after us.
It wasn't conceived to come after us. Like, he is not even arguing. That's outrageous. He is not even arguing. The way this argument typically goes is that, well, the Rome Statute, countries that are signed to the Rome Statute abide by the rule set. And that they would say, well, the US is not party to it. They would say Russia is not a party to it. And they would say Israel is not a party to it. And then they would argue, typically, Palestine is not a country. And because Palestine is not a country, it doesn't apply to Palestine. Okay, you can make that case. The court is going to think differently. And whether it's a country or not is secondary to the point that they are party to the Rome Statute. And so it does apply. That's not what Graham is arguing, though. Graham is arguing this kind of supremacist argument. It was never designed for us. It was designed for those dictators in Africa or those, places that can't really defend themselves, that we can invade and whatnot. But it wasn't designed for us. It wasn't designed for Israel. Why not? Why not? Why not? What's special about Israel? What's special about America? That war crimes, that they can't commit war crimes and they can't be held accountable for the war crimes that they commit. Like, this is utterly deranged. It's outrageous as an assessment. Lindsey Graham believes that somehow we are special. We're so special that when we commit war crimes, we are above any sort of man-made law or rule set in order to hold them accountable or hold us accountable for those war crimes. That is an astonishing argument to make. And yet, that seems to be the case that Lindsey Graham is making. I'll play it one more time. Lindsey Graham, we are above the law. And so is Israel, considering God chose them for something and for some reason.
The statute doesn't apply to Israel or the United States or France or Germany or Great Britain because it wasn't conceived to come after us.
Again, why not? Why not? Why not? The Rome Statute was conceived of going after countries or groups, countries, people that are committing a genocide, that are committing crimes against humanity. It wasn't specific or just it didn't include, or it wasn't one of those things where there was like a blacklist where it's like, yeah, we're going to put this out there and we're going to go after people who commit war crimes, except for America, Israel, and France. Nobody said that. That's not in the statute. That's not written down anywhere that says, except for. You're human beings. And as human beings, if you're committing crimes, war crimes specifically, if you're killing people, starving people, maiming people, shooting children in the face, shooting press in the face, killing UN workers, if you're doing that and killing women and children indiscriminately, yes, you are also eligible for war crimes and to be brought up on those war crimes and should be brought up on those war crimes. I'll go further. Lindsey Graham's issue has less to do with this idea that, well, it wasn't designed for us. And his issue is they're coming after us next. That's his issue. His issue is our wars in Afghanistan, our kill squads in South America. We have committed killings all across the globe. And with this rules-based order has been functionally above the law, any sort of law that may exist from the standpoint of the way we deal with each other under normal circumstances. If they indeed go after Israel for murdering and slaughtering women and children indiscriminately, they can very well come after us, considering we paid for Israel to do it. Meaning, look, man, if you were in the US, I gave you a gun, I told you who to go kill, I gave you political cover for it, I lied to the cops when the cops came and asked me about it, I am also going to jail. And I'm going to jail probably for just as long as you, because I was also instrumental in the murder that took place. If the US is paying 70% or more for the bullets, guns, missiles, airplanes, and providing political cover as they go about that massive killing spree, then we are also culpable for it. Lindsey Graham knows that. And what Lindsey Graham knows is if the court can go after Netanyahu and Gallant, they can also come after us. That's his issue. Yeah, he's a Zionist. Yeah, he's racist in the sense that he hates Arabs. And so he's okay if they kill 2 million of them in Gaza. But his issue is self-preservation. We cannot call ourselves a superpower and above it all in a rules-based order if we are indeed tethered to man-made laws. And if Israel is culpable for the murder and the slaughter that they're committing, the fact that we back them on this to the hilt, politically and economically, then we are also liable. We are next. That's his point. I want to bring in our guests. We're joined with the one and only Jeremy Kuzmarov. Man, thank you for joining me today, man. Jeremy Kuzmarov is, come on. There we are. Jeremy Kuzmarov is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Jeremy, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you.
No, man, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Did you hear that clip that I played from Lindsey Graham where he effectively said, well, not effectively, like he did say it outright, that the ICC wasn't meant for countries like America or wasn't meant for countries like Israel, that it was meant effectively for, I imagine him saying, lesser countries. It's just like astonishing. There's nothing in the rule book that indicates or says what Lindsey Graham is saying.
Well, that's right. There's nothing that says any particular country is exempt. And I mean, basically, he's saying we're above the law. We could do whatever the hell we want.
Yep.
And the law only applies, to other countries. And I guess it's insinuated maybe that the chauvinistic attitude that we're better than anybody else. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable. But I mean, that's what we've seen, over the last generation. The U.S. and its, friends have been able to get away with so much that, imagine if other countries had done what the United States has done as far as invading other countries, sponsoring terrorist groups, like in Syria, bombing sovereign nations, committing egregious war crime. I mean, now you have a defense secretary who is defending people like Eddie Gallagher and these people who committed egregious war crime where they like tortured Iraqi teenagers and stuff like that, and he's defending them. So that seems to be an extension also of Lindsey Graham's attitude.
1000% agree. I want to show you something because I am amazed by this. I was blown away by this because it makes absolutely no sense to me, and yet, um, I suppose a lot of things don't make sense to me. Take a look at this. This article came out, and I thought to myself, how the hell are they going to do that? So the U.S. blows up Nord Stream. We blew it up. Don't believe this nonsense about 3 Ukrainians in a dinghy that goes out after drinking a few beers and decide, yeah, let's just blow up that pipeline. That pipeline was massive construction engineering. Like like there was no way that 3 Ukrainians in a dinghy could do it. And more to the point, Joe Biden said that he was going to blow it up. So I take Joe Biden at his word, since it blew up, that he was involved. Unless they have psychics in his administration, I don't buy anything else. All right, Seymour Hersh's story makes more sense on the pipeline thing. And then this article comes out. U.S. investors and Trump supporter wants to buy Nord Stream 2. How does that work? How does that work? How on earth can a U.S. investor buy a pipeline that was paid for and built by Germany and Russia? How does that work? No, Jeremy, I'm asking. I'm seriously. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I don't know the answer either. But you're right. I mean, that is unbelievable. I don't know what his intention was. I mean, that was, the goal. I mean, that was going to bring great benefits to the Russian economy. I mean, I think that was a reason for the, major terrorist act is to, as part of this campaign to this
No.
economic warfare
Jeremy,
directed
I'm sorry
against
to
Russia.
interrupt. I don't mean. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's not. I get that part. Meaning, I get that they wanted to break the connection between Europe and Russia, and the pipeline was a physical embodiment of that connection, especially Germany. Like the German economy flourished as a result of that natural gas, of the oil that they were getting, and they needed it, right? I'm saying, how does a private investor buy a pipeline that doesn't belong to the U.S. in any way?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, and this would seem to be, show the blatant, naked economic interest driving U.S. foreign policy in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine. I mean,
Yeah.
if a U.S. investor is able to take over the pipeline that had been built by Russia, it's direct war profiteering and profiteering off terrorism. But yeah, I don't know how that worked. I mean, I would think Russia had the right to it. And yeah, I don't know the logistics of it, but yeah, it seems to be an example of blatant economic imperialism and terrorism on behalf of U.S. corporate interests.
Yeah, that is
And I
utterly
mean, yeah, the whole goal, yeah, was so that U.S. natural, could sell their own natural gas, undercut the Russian economy,
right.
and this seems to be just taking that to the next level. And perhaps we find out this investor is very well connected politically.
What's wild about it? Angela Merkel, in her memoir, she pointed out that the U.S. was open, or seemingly was damaging even their allies' economics. Like if it ever came to between us and them, we had no issue with damaging our allies. And that is literally what is happening right now with Europe. I mean, the German economy has fundamentally collapsed. And you look at some of the other economies of Europe, those things were completely reliant upon getting energy at a certain cost that now they're paying 3, 4 times more than what they were paying prior. Like it doesn't seem to sink in. It weirds me out that these governments are willing to off themselves, like damage themselves, just to maintain this relationship when this relationship doesn't seem to be doing them any favors, either from the standpoint of the wars or from the standpoint of their own economics. What do you think is in their minds for this? Is it just, well, we are part of the white world, meaning the West in a sense, and we need to stand together and our 14, 15%, and America is the head of that world. And so we are better off with America, even if it damages us in the process of that. Like, what do you think goes on in the mind of Europeans for this kind of vassal relationship that they cling to, like grim death? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, yeah, Henry Kissinger once said, bad to be an enemy of the United States, but even worse to be its friend. And you see, I mean, really, the United States is out for its own interest, and yeah, its interest was to sever relation between Germany and Russia, even though that would have been beneficial to Germany, like with the pipeline. So,
Right.
and they want to undercut, I mean, advance U.S. power, whatever the cost. And I mean, they'll throw their allies under the bus. We've seen that with the Kurds or the Hmong in Laos. I mean, they just mobilize groups when it's convenient and then abandon them to their fate. So I mean, I agree with you. Leaders should get smart and see that alliance with the United States is not. I mean, maybe there are a lot of short-term benefits. I think they're often not thinking of the long term. They're just thinking of all the money. Often they're getting a lot of short-term benefits, a lot of
Yep.
money out of that relationship, and it keeps them in power temporarily, but it's not in the long-term interest. And ultimately, it's going to undermine their power and legitimacy among their own population. I mean, we're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing a backlash against these leaders that have compromised their own economies and supported the war in Ukraine and allied so closely with the United States. They're facing political difficulty and backlash at this time. And I mean, yeah, you can compare it with Ukraine. I mean, ultimately, Ukraine has sowed its own self-destruction through alliance with the United States. I mean, it got all this money and weapons, but look, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. They've lost 20% of their territory. Their economy is in absolute shambles. Youth are escaping the country, and I don't know how they're going to, sustain their economy over the long term. So it's been a disaster for them. And even Israel, I mean, Israel's allowed itself to be used by the United States to do a lot of America's dirty work. And I mean, Israel's become so hated in the region, and they're facing attacks now on different fronts. A lot of Israelis, there's an outward migration of Israelis, and the country is not stable to live in there. Israelis are migrating. There's a brain drain in Israel that's going on now, and the long-term health of the country is really in question. So even Israel, ultimately, I think a lot of Jewish people are starting to question the decisions to just ally themselves with the United States, which has helped empower the far right in Israel. So even in that case, you have a country whose alliance with the United States may be destabilizing over the long run.
I want to point out the clip for Boris Johnson. So for the longest time, when people would say this is a proxy war, the West and NATO is effectively at war with Russia, and they're using Ukraine as a battering ram to do it. Or if people would say this is about NATO, the fact that Ukraine wanted to be part of NATO and Russia was fighting this war to stop NATO aspirations, and they would say, no, that's just Russian propaganda. That's not true. So we have a new Russian propagandist. And that new Russian propagandist came out, I believe this was yesterday, and said this.
Let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war, but we're not giving our proxies the ability to do the job. And for years and years now, we've been allowing them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs, and it has been cruel. It has been cruel, and we need now to give them what they need. Let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war.
What's wild
but
about
we're
this,
not.
What's wild about this statement, where he acknowledges it's cruel that we're doing this. Like, so he gets that part. But what I don't think he gets is that it's cruel in and of itself. It's meaning it's not cruel that you're not giving them the weapons. It's cruel that you're doing it at all. Like, there's a certain level of cruelty associated with fighting a war, that doesn't need to be fought. It's a catastrophe in and of itself from the number of people that have been killed or wounded or just broken bodies that are coming back from that conflict, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian. And you had the Minsk agreements. You overthrew the government of that country. None of those things needed to happen. All of those things were provocative. You blew off the Istanbul agreements. Again, none of that needed to happen. Very provocative. and you built up this massive military in a country that didn't need to happen. Meaning, what he is considering cruel and immoral is the fact that we haven't given them enough weapons, not that they initiated a war that didn't need to happen. That's just wild to me. Give me your take on that. What is your take on Boris Johnson in this statement? I mean, it seems that they finally come to Jesus and admit it. Okay, it's a proxy war. Fair enough. You got us. It's a proxy war. We're waging war against Russia.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. That's an amazing admission that it's a direct war against Russia,
But
and
it's an
that they're
obvious
using
admission.
they're
I'm sorry.
using
It's just an
Ukraine.
obvious admission.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have many U.S. leaders saying that. You know, they're always saying, "Oh, we have to help the Ukrainians stand up and
Mhm.
defend themselves." But Johnson is totally contradicting that and saying it's a proxy war by the United States against Russia. But this claim, I mean, how much fighting with one hand tied behind their back? I mean, how much weapons can one country give to another country?
Right.
They've given billions and billions, and it's not even our country. So somehow that's not enough. That's one hand tied behind the back. I mean, it's record levels. I mean, I've never seen this kind of transfer of military weaponry ever. I mean, it's almost unprecedented, and yet he's still claiming one hand tied behind the back. And I mean, I think it's just this illusion that somehow Ukraine could actually take on the Russians, a much stronger country who has a long history of fighting back against foreign aggressors, and a nation of people who are proud and will defend their country when they see it as necessary. So this is a totally futile cause. So this claim, I think he falls in the pattern of Hitler and Napoleon, and kind of underestimating Russia. In giving off the impression that this is a winnable war and that somehow Ukraine just doesn't have enough resources, when that's total BS. They've had a record level of military weaponry at their disposal, and it's just there's no chance that they could ever gain back the territory they lost or ever defeat the Russians.
Right.
And it underscored the futility of this whole operation and the utter waste of taxpayer dollar and resources on this, and the self-destructive nature of this war for Ukraine and for these Western countries like the United States and Britain that are suffering in different ways from waging it economically because of the resources that have been drained and just the loss of moral capital
Yeah.
around the world.
What's wild about this also is this kind of weird expectation that they can win a nuclear war. Like, because if Boris Johnson is right, let's say you gave them every weapon system that you could come up with. I mean, for one, the Orezhnik, the fact that Russia had that and never used it, and even only used it to demonstrate what they could do, not necessarily because of what they needed it for, gets across that Russia was fighting this with one arm tied behind their back. If they would have initiated with a weapon of this like magnitude from the beginning, like then you could say, okay, well, Russia gave everything it had. That's not really the case. Also, what Boris Johnson doesn't seem to get is that you can only escalate so far. That Russia has escalatory dominance. This is literally happening on their border. And unless you're willing to go to a nuclear war, which there's no way to win it in that sense, then there's no way to win it. Like, meaning, like, I fundamentally, short of killing as many Russians as possible or trying to damage the Russian economy, which hadn't happened, by the way. They didn't damage the Russian economy. The economy is at like a number 4 or something. Unless they were willing to go to nuclear war, then I don't understand his point. Like, how far are you willing to go? And that's, honest to God, that's the question that I've been stuck with from the very beginning. When it becomes clear that they've lost, when it becomes clear that this notion that we are, because losing makes it clear that we are in a multipolar world more than probably anything else that's happening around the globe. When that becomes clear, will they accept that? Or will they continue to push? And if they continue to push, what are they pushing with? So I believe Scott Ritter pointed out that if Russia didn't respond forcefully to the use of the Takhanov missile and to this level of escalation, that eventually there'll be troops U.S. troops, or for that matter, European troops, NATO troops, in Western Ukraine. Now, some of the reporting that came out, I believe this was yesterday, maybe day before yesterday, pointed out that there were plans, behind the scenes plans, to put Western troops in Ukraine, almost like carving Ukraine up among various countries, with this idea of, well, Russia would never attack Western troops. And so we can now build up the Ukrainian military. I guess we can draft kids and put those kids in military uniforms and give them a gun and potato, and we can give them more weapons once those weapon systems come into play, and we can freeze the conflict the way it is. And then once we've built up enough to attack Russia, like, this is deranged. It's deranged on so many levels because it assumes that Russia is going to allow them to do that, knowing full well that the entire point of them doing that is to attack Russia once they build up sufficient military capability. It's outrageous. Give me a take on this. Had you heard about this, that this was planning in the making, that they were trying to do this? And what do you think happens if they do try to do that?
Well, yeah, as far as dismembering Ukraine, I mean, yeah, that shows. I mean, Ukraine is a loser in all this. They've lost a lot of their territory. They've lost their breadbasket in Eastern Europe. So this has been catastrophic for the Ukrainian population and nation. And all those people who are waving Ukraine flags. I mean, they're ultimately sowing the demise of that country by pushing them into confronting a stronger neighbor. Uh, and then as far as the U.S. troops, I mean, or Western troops, I mean, I don't know how much politically that the population, how far is the population willing to go? I mean, I think a lot of people kind of went along with the propaganda when they didn't have a personal stake in the war. It was just, a cause they could support from afar, but it didn't directly impact on their lives. But then if American lives are at stake or European lives are at stake, I mean, already there's a lot of dissension about this war. I mean, we see it in U.S. politics. The Republicans kind of seized on this issue, and there are a number of Republicans who are voting to block aid. And Trump claimed he was going to end the conflict, and that was catering to a base of voter who really doesn't see any value in this enterprise. And you have a commentator like Tucker Carlson, who have a huge following, who are very critical of the Ukraine conflict. So I don't think there's great political capital that U.S. leaders can actually get away with sending U.S. troops into the fray. I think that this war is already very unpopular. There's not going to be support for doing that. So I think that they can only keep doing what they're doing, is send these weapons and maybe strike into Russia. But I think actually what they want really maybe is just a kind of status quo. I mean, it's good for the military-industrial complex if they could keep sending weapons. And I think their strategy, was to try and grind Putin into a quagmire and weaken the Russian economy. Although, as you point out, that really
Didn't work.
strategy hasn't worked very
Yeah.
well. But I think they may persist in that approach. I don't think they can get away with directly sending U.S. troops into the fray politically. And the same would be true in Europe. There's been a lot of protests in European countries over this, and I don't think these governments are already unpopular, and they would have to become ever more authoritarian to get away with sending
Yeah.
troops there.
Do you think they're going to end up sending their kids into war? I mean, because they, like, the idea that the Biden administration was like, well, you have manpower shortages, you need to send your teenagers into battle. I mean, that seemed like, that is astonishing to me, because it's bad enough. So some of the reporting had that the average age of the Ukrainian fighter was like in their 40s, basically people like my age, dragging my ass out there into a war zone, just unimaginable. And for them to say, okay, well, you need to get your 18-year-olds and your 19-year-olds, you need to draft them now and send them into the war. And when people make this point of saying, okay, so you want them to fight to the last dead Ukrainian, and then you add on to that, that Ukraine in the Gallup polling at this point is saying, we want to stop this war. You get 52% saying, bring it to an end, bring it to a close, with the Biden administration effectively pushing the government to send in your children. That is mind blowing to me. I mean, even Elon Musk had a comment on it. He was like, "Oh, that's ghastly. Like, I can't believe that you're trying to push them to do that. It's a losing war. They've lost." And it's like you're trying to get them to lose even more in a war that they've already lost, as opposed to bringing this to a close and come to some kind of real agreement. Do you think Ukraine is even going to agree to doing that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this is like another Vietnam type situation, and
Yes.
Vietnam in hindsight, and there's a good book by another historian called "Vietnam: The Unwinnable War,"
Mm.
and we can see that in Ukraine. Yeah, and those of us who followed very carefully understood this, but I think that the media coverage was so poor in the United States, and there was this Russophobia that was really cultivated, especially among the Democratic Party and
Hillary
liberal
Clinton. Yeah.
media. Yeah. Uh, so I think a lot of the American public was blind to it, and the progressive movements have not been very sharp. They've been sharp and attuned to the injustice going on in the Middle East and
Yeah.
with Israeli assault on Gaza, but they've not been very sharp to the injustice that's gone on in Ukraine. And there have been no sensitivity to the people of Eastern Ukraine who have been victimized for a decade now
Yeah.
of Ukrainian military attacks with U.S. and other Western weaponry and these neo-Nazi groups that have been unleashed. And the people there, a lot of them had to build underground bunkers and live underground for years. They've been shelled by Ukraine. So many civilians have been killed, and there's been no sensitivity at all, and no protests. And a lot of that is because of the media washout. And a lot of these, even young activists, I've been in contact with some of them, and I found they're not that well informed, or some of the leaders of those campus groups, they were not well informed at all about world affairs and this conflict. That's because of the media, but again, largely other factors may be at play. But related to your point, I think more people will pay attention if U.S. youth are forced to fight in this. I think they will. I mean, that's what happened in Vietnam, is that it
Yeah.
forced people to really follow what was going on and look at the backstory and see how the U.S. got into Vietnam. And I mean, it helped with the release of the Pentagon Papers,
Mhm.
exposed a lot of the deception and machination behind the scenes. But a lot of that is available about Ukraine. You have Oliver Stone even made a documentary about it, and we have a lot of detail that have came to light about the role that Victoria Nuland played
Mhm.
in the coup in Ukraine in 2014. And I mean, there have been exposés about how the CIA set up 12 bases in Ukraine right after that coup, and about the neo-Nazi group. So I mean, there is a lot of information out there. So the more people look into it, the less they'd be willing to sacrifice their own lives or their kids' lives in this. And yeah, in Ukraine itself, I read an article in the New York Times, which is incredibly pro-Ukraine, that Ukrainian youth were that they were going to rock concerts in Ukraine, like in Kiev, and that there were army agents there to kidnap them and press gang them into the army, and
Right.
that some Ukrainian youth, that age range, 18, 19, were afraid to go out publicly because they knew there were army recruiters and agents kidnapping them for the army, and they didn't want to go. And there's a
Yeah.
huge number of Ukrainian youth who fled the country or defected from the army. So, I mean, how long can this war continue when, as you say, yeah, they're recruiting 40-year-old, they're kidnapping youth to try and fight. But the Ukrainians are turning against the war, and they're going to turn against Zelensky at some point. I mean, he'll be regarded. I'm sure he's regarded as a national traitor. He sold out his country to
Yeah.
foreign interests,
Yeah.
and he even turned over the economy to a multinational corporation and to Wall Street, because the Biden administration set up this economic reconstruction agency headed by Penny Pritzker, Miss Wall Street, who is going to further Wall Street's takeover of Ukraine's economy. So I mean, what was it for Ukraine? They lost at least 20% of their territory. They lost the flower of their youth. so their economy can be turned over to Wall Street and they can be humiliated by the Russians. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with you.
Zelensky is a traitor to that nation, and somebody will take retribution on him, whether it's now or in the future. And I don't know how long he can last in power.
Yeah, I agree with you. I keep asking that too. What was this for? I mean, for all of these people saying we love Ukraine and we're raising the Ukrainian flag, and it's like, dude, if Ukraine was neutral, none of this would be happening. And I feel the same way about Taiwan, right? It's like, oh, we need to protect Taiwan. Taiwan was never under threat. It became under threat the moment that you try to put your hands on it and try to get this kind of independence movement. Um, yeah, it's like we create monsters. It's just wild. From your point of view, do you consider what's happening in Georgia a color revolution? Because for my, let me say it this way, and I want to get your take on it. I consider the events that are happening around the world to be not isolated. I consider them to be unified on some level. So, for example, what's happening in Syria right now, where you get Turkey admitting that they're sending jihadis, sending terrorists into Syria, which is an astonishing admission when you think about it. That you're effectively using terrorist groups to attack another nation. They Erdogan wouldn't raise a hand to help the Palestinian cause. He'd make speeches, he'd complain, but he wouldn't raise a hand to do anything about it. But in this situation, Turkey says Syrian rebel assault near Aleppo is a limited operation. He's involved. Israel is involved. The US is involved. Russia is involved. Iran is involved. Like all of these countries are involved in this one country, meaning Syria. Give me your take on what is happening on the ground. From my understanding, they're looking at Syria as a way to stop, let's say, the Syrian government from assisting Hezbollah and assisting resistance groups against Israeli occupation, or for that matter, Israeli genocide. And the belief is that now that a ceasefire has been seized or signed with Hezbollah, you've limited and stopped Hezbollah's capability of helping Gaza. So you've isolated Gaza into its own enclave where Israel can basically kill and exterminate without having any kind of assistance from Hezbollah in that case. And then going after Syria with the thought of stopping any kind of pipeline or any kind of movement of materials and assistance from Syria to those groups in Lebanon, or for the matter, to the groups in Palestine. Give me your take on this. How do you view this? Because Turkey has gotten involved, the US has gotten involved, and Israel has gotten involved in pushing these terrorists to attack, basically putting out of Idlib into attack Aleppo. Give me your take on this.
Well, yeah, I think you present a good analysis that this is related to the regional conflict in the Middle East, that it's designed to uh, sever or weaken Syria and inhibit its ability to assist adversary of the U.S. And Israel, whether it's Hezbollah. And I mean, this is a long-standing campaign against
Right.
Bashar al-Assad. And Assad, at the end of the day, Assad was an independent nationalistic leader, and the U.S. has gone after, and used allies to go after those kind of leaders for decades. I mean, in the past, they went after Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was
Mm-hmm.
a socialist, and he was trying to form a pan-Arab union. And the Assad dynasty was always independent of the West, and more nationalistic, to use Syria's resources for its own development and to forge broader pan-Arab network. And was always closer with the Russians. Even Hafez al-Assad was tied more with the Soviet Union and with Nasser. So. I mean, from the U.S. point of view, yeah, it fits just a long-standing policy of trying to undermine nationalistic, more left-leaning. Although Assad is not quite a leftist, but he is, yeah, more independent,
Yeah, it's
nationalistic, and that's what they
nationalistic. Yeah.
don't want. and that fits a decades-long pattern of U.S. foreign policy. And then, yeah, you have these other calculations you're pointing out with Turkey and Israel interest and the fear. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the U.S. it's tied to its Israel policy of supporting the far right in Israel and its goal of establishing a greater Israel, and striking a blow against a group like Hezbollah or anybody that might counter Israeli designs. And I mean, I think the ultimate target is Iran. If Iran,
Yeah.
they want to weaken Iran and sever any connection between the Iranians and the Syrians. If they can mobilize together, they could represent a more formidable adversary for Israel and U.S. interests in the region as well as Turkey.
I know, but play this out though. I mean, this goes back to once before. I mean, I hit Mark Sloboda up when all of this was happening and asked Mark, I said, Mark, what the hell is going on in Syria? And Mark pointed out, well, the war in Syria never ended. It was in a freeze. And the kind of freeze that they want to have in Ukraine, with this idea that you can train all of these terrorists and then send those terrorists back into the fray, um, from whatever base they were in, let's say in Idlib province. And I guess, that's kind of my point of view in regards to what they want to do in Ukraine. It's like, okay, we want to freeze this for several years. We want to rebuild the military, and then we can attack at will later on and reignite the conflict, which is why I said Russia's not going to allow it to happen. In Syria's case, the government was too weak to continue the conflict, meaning it was damaged. If it wasn't for Russia and Iran coming in to assist, the Syrian government might have fell. Assad clung to power like grim death, like he wouldn't necessarily give it up. He held the line on this front. And I guess my thing is, what do they expect to happen if the government falls? Like if the Assad government actually fell and the terrorists took over, is that really a better outcome? Because that's seemingly what they want to have. I mean, because otherwise, what is the point of having all of these terrorist groups attack the Syrian government, killing all of the people that are in their pathway? I was watching Vanessa Beasley. She lives there. Beasley pointed out that she was watching a video of one of these terrorists chopping the heads, like literally using a knife to cut the head off of a civilian, like this, or a Syrian soldier. I'm sorry. Like this stuff is like ghastly in what they're doing. But I guess my point is, what do they expect? Do they want the Syrian government to collapse? And if it collapses, they want the terrorists to take over the Syrian government? Is that what they want, to create another ISIS when they took over all of Iraq? Ooh, like, what is your thinking on this? What is the plan, the ultimate goal in all of this from your point of view?
Well, the ultimate goal may be what you said at the beginning, because it may be unrealistic that the Assad government would fall, but they want to just destabilize the government, weaken the country, so that
Yeah.
Syria can't be a strong force in the Middle East, because Assad is a nationalist, and it's similar in Libya. Well, in the Libya case, they did succeed in overthrowing Gaddafi, and the country has been chaotic ever since. But now they've been blocking elections, because it's likely if Libya had fair elections, Gaddafi's son would come back into power, and Libya could reemerge in the next generation what it was under Muammar Gaddafi, which was a strong regional power that was developing its economy, using its oil resources to develop its economy. And Gaddafi, those are the kind of leader that the West doesn't like, a Gaddafi and Assad, because these are strong leaders who will assert an independent policy and work to undercut Western influence and power in the region. So if they can keep them bogged down fighting these terrorists, that's a win for them. Keep them weak. And yeah, I mean, Syria could, if a strong Syria could retake the Golan Heights and could ultimately, challenge Israel, would support Hezbollah, could ally with Iran into an anti-American, anti-Israel bloc, and that's what they don't want. And Ukraine, I think they just want to keep the Russians. It's a way to try and weaken the Russians, just to try and keep them fighting there for a long time. That's why I think we'll continue to see this kind of low, and we might see that with Ukraine, that there's a kind of freeze. but they're going to continue to arm. I mean, I think Trump, it's an illusion that he's going to create this peace deal and end the conflict. I think there may be a freeze, but I think they want to just use Ukraine as a base for potentially weakening the Russians, and they want to have a presence there, for the future. Because don't forget, the U.S. has set up a lot of CIA bases there, and there
Right.
are troops there, and they can use that as a launching point in the future. So I think they'll want to stay there and just grind the Russians out, grind the Assad out, and try and weaken these governments.
Well, the Russians have been on bombing runs, going after the terrorists that are trying to take down the government. And look, oftentimes when I talk about this stuff, I don't necessarily ascribe any, I don't give a take on the leaders of those countries. And I don't give a take on the leaders of the countries because, from my point of view, it's irrelevant. We shouldn't be screwing around and getting all of these people killed in these governments. Like the idea that it's like, yeah, we have a bunch of terrorists that we can use to go and attack a country. That is outrageous. Like that is mind blowing. And for Erdogan to effectively admit to, yeah, we're doing a limited operation by sending in terrorists to go after this government, working with Israel, a country that we supposedly didn't like, that we wouldn't lift a finger to do anything about, despite the fact that he would give all of these speeches of fire and anger associated with those speeches towards Israel. It's just outrageous that this stuff is happening in this way. Also, Georgia is another front in this case. I don't know if you've been following what has been taking place in Georgia, but there have been all sorts of these massive protests in Tbilisi, especially when the FARA law came up, when it was this kind of question of whether or not they were going to pass their own FARA law. And as I pointed out, the U.S. has a FARA law, and yet the U.S. was complaining about them and their FARA law. It's just weird. What do you think the protests that are taking place in Georgia are another color revolution or an attempted color revolution? What is your thoughts on this?
And yeah, and just to point on the previous discussion,
Yep.
it undercut the claim of the U.S. fighting a war on terror. I mean, it shows such hypocrisy that they're arming these vicious terrorists in Syria, and for years we've been told we have to fight a war on terror,
Right.
and yet we're arming
Right.
terrorists
Right.
and creating the conditions that would breed terrorism, as well as arming and supporting these terrorists. So and we've seen how Israel used terrorism, like with these pagers, bombs. So,
Uh-huh.
I mean, the rhetoric of the war on terror is just totally hypocritical by now and delegitimized among a large sector of the population who would be following this. Now, as far as Georgia, I mean, I'm not an expert on the internal politics, but I do see a pattern. I mean, I think we're in a new Cold War, and I think the U.S. is involved in numerous different countries. I
Mhm.
mean, there's a battle going on between, pro Russian, or I mean, in the case of Georgia, you had Georgia Dream, which was a lot more like kind of middle of the road government, but they
Right.
were somewhat friendly to Russia.
Right.
And I think, as in the Cold War, the U.S. ambition is to get all these like pro-Western governments, anti-Russian governments. So the U.S. is certainly involved in Georgia. I mean, groups like the National Endowment for Democracy are active there. I follow the National Endowment for Democracy and write articles about them. That this is
Mhm.
an offshoot of the CIA that does political propaganda and supports like opposition figures in
Right.
governments that the U.S. targets for regime change and tries to bring together activist networks to foment, color revolutions or uprisings against those governments. And NED has been very active in Georgia.
Yeah.
I saw a forum put on by the NED with some Georgian lawmakers who are against this law. But I mean, the law was sensible when you have groups like the NED, and when NGOs aren't exactly neutral and when they serve a political agenda. I mean, Russia had to pass a law because they were targeted for destabilization and regime change
Right.
operation. These NGOs were operating as fronts. So I mean, it's a legitimate government policy, and there may be some organic opposition to the government, but on the other hand, you'd be suspicious that groups like NED are not helping to provoke these kind of protests. And you know, commensurate with a larger strategy. And I think we see the tide is turning in some countries, like I was following in Romania.
I saw
I
that.
think they just had an election, and you know, they're moving more toward a pro-Russian position because they don't want to be used as a pawn in a new Cold War, a staging base for an attack on Russia. And you
Yeah,
know, the U.S. has put a lot of base missiles in
that's right.
Denizelu, Romania, and I mean the population has to question their role in this. They don't want a war with Russia, and they don't want to be used, and they don't want to turn into the next Ukraine, as we've been discussing on this show. That's been a disaster. It's so the destruction of Ukraine. So countries that ally so close with the United States and will get more directly involved in any conflict with Russia risk their own self-destruction. And that's why we're seeing a pattern where countries are voting more for candidates who are pro-Russian or pro-peace. And Georgia the same. I believe Georgia Dream won the last election. They still
They
have the
did.
upper hand politically, and they're not. I think they're neutral or middle of the road
Yeah,
party,
they're
but
just neutral. I mean,
but
like a
they're
country that's neutral, they call them pro-Russian. It's like
yeah,
they're just nationalistic. It's the
and
weirdest
I
thing in
mean,
the world.
it's normal, that's good because given the Russia-Georgia conflict, I
Right.
mean, it's in their self-interest to ally with Russia, to have firstly friendly economic relations. I mean, that's a boon to their economy. They dependent on Russia for trade. So, I mean, to go against Russia is suicidal economically, and then they don't want to risk another war. I mean, the U.S. and Georgia, had color revolutions, and they supported
Hmm.
disastrous leader like Mikhail Saakashvili, who was allied with the neoconservatives in the United States, and he provoked war with Russia, in 2008, 2009,
Yeah.
over these breakaway provinces in South Ossetia. And I mean, that was not good for Georgia to get in the war with Russia. And luckily, the war was rather short, and it didn't have
Hmm.
the same kind of effects on the population as Ukraine. But if that war dragged on, it would have been cataclysmic for the Georgian population. So why would their people want a leader who starts antagonizing the Russians
Exactly.
and risks a war with a stronger neighbor? It's suicidal for them. So these populations don't want the Saakashvili, Zelensky type leaders, and we're seeing that in places like Romania with the election results.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know anybody in their right mind that will want to be used as a platform in that way. So no, man, I agree with you. Jeremy, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Jeremy Kuzmarov, he's managing editor for Covert Action magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Check Jeremy out. Definitely, man. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
All right. I want to bring on my next guest. Definitely appreciate you joining me and coming back so soon. Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. He is speaker, author, and a rabbi. Thank you for this, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jamal.
No, thank you for joining me. I want to get your take just on everything that has been taking place over the last year. We have had Hamas attack on October 7th. We've had Israeli response where they have just killed up to 40, 50,000 human beings. That's on a low count. You get the attacks that's taking place in Lebanon against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and you get a deal associated with it. You get a blank check given by the United States that has been somewhat, I got to be honest, even astonishing to me, to the extent in which they've gone in this, in the amount of money, supplies, weapons, political support, and everything else that they've supplied. How do you, what's the context to this? If you had to frame this and put this in a context for people to understand it that may not have been paying all that much attention to everything that's been going on, what would it be? How would you explain it?
The first question I would ask in that context is, why me? Why am I, a rabbi, the one being asked this question? Now, obviously, I'm Jewish, I'm a rabbi, and because of that, people believe that I have a connection with Israel, which is the Jewish state. In fact, when there are Jews who are against Israel, that's very meaningful to the anti-Israel community, because look, even Jews are against Israel. I like to call it the it's like what was her name in the Vietnam War?
Oh, I know you're talking. Oh man,
She
what is
posed with the tank.
Yeah, I know.
Tank.
I know
You know who I'm
you're
talking about?
Yeah,
Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
It's like the Jane Fonda effect. It's like these Jews are the Jane Fondas, and that is the thing that causes everybody a blind spot. We have to understand something about Israel that you're not going to get from listening to the media. You're only going to get it by studying the history of Zionist ideology.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who will tell you the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and in 1948 this happened, in 1956 that happened, but the Zionist ideology is really the missing piece to the puzzle over here. Israel is different than all other countries in the world. All other countries in the world are countries of their citizens, meaning the United States is managed for the benefit of the American citizens. Italy is the country of the Italian citizens.
Right.
There is an exception to that rule. Israel is not the country of the Israeli citizens. Israel is the country of the Jewish nationality. Now, let me explain that. In Israel, there are different categories that they categorize their citizens by. One is religion, so you're Jewish, you're Christian, you're Muslim, Hindu, whatever. There is citizenship, so you're an Israeli citizen, you're not an Israeli citizen, fine. But then there's nationality. In America, in Italy, the American nationality and American citizenship are the same thing, meaning my country is America. My nation is America. One nation under God with liberty and justice for all, right? And not so in Israel. In Israel, there's no such thing as an Israeli nationality. And they did this on purpose. The nationality, there are about 120, 130 nationalities in Israel, one of which is Jewish. Jewish, to me, to the Jews, until Zionism came, meant that you were a part of a religion, that you were commanded by God to fulfill 613 commandments, as opposed to the rest of the world that is commanded by God to fulfill 7 commandments. That's Judaism. The whole world is commanded to fulfill a certain amount of commandments. And then there is another group of people who is commanded to be a priestly class, I guess you could say. And they are obligated to live a lifestyle of, I guess you could call it holiness, priesthood. And they have to fulfill 613 commandments. Some are born into it. I guess you can call it a calling. And others can join if they want, but it's not easy to join, to take on all those obligations, to change your lifestyle. Nonetheless, those are called converts. Those people who are obligated to fulfill a more priestly, holy lifestyle, the 613 commandments, they're called Jews. That's basically the religion of Judaism, which is why, by the way, Jews don't proselytize. We accept converts. The most famous convert in the world is probably Ivanka Trump. But and King David was a descendant, as it says in the book of Ruth, the Moabite converts to Judaism. So we absolutely accept converts if that's what they want, no problem. They're one of us, they're a Jew, no question about it. Equal Jew to any other Jew. But the reason we don't proselytize is because whereas in other religions, you need to practice that religion in order to be, let's say, saved or even not to go to hell. According to Christianity, you need to be a Christian to be saved. And I don't want to step on the theological toes of any Christians, but I know there's discussion whether if you're not Christian, you end up burning in hell. Whatever it is, you have to be a Christian.
Right,
in Islam, you have to be. In Judaism, you do not have to be Jewish. You could serve God and get rewarded for serving God and be a non-Jew, as long as you fulfill the 7 Noahide laws. No killing, no stealing, no idol worshiping. You have to set up some kind of civil law system. It doesn't have to be the Jewish system. So according to Judaism, you do not have to be Jewish. You could serve God who created Adam, from whom all of humanity descends. And being Jewish is, I guess, like a calling to join a different type of lifestyle, more responsibilities, and yes, more rewards. But we don't proselytize because there's nothing wrong with being a non-Jew, according to Judaism.
Right.
Now, the Zionists changed all that. The Zionists decided that for their reasons of their own, because they didn't like Judaism, they believed that this framework, this model of Judaism is responsible for anti-Semitism, that people hate Jews because of the lifestyle that they lead, because of the personalities that they have, because the character traits that they possess. You're thinking now, and so your viewers say, that sounds anti-Semitic, and the answer is yes. The early Zionists shared the anti-Semitic stereotypes of Jews, and therefore they embarked on a social engineering project, which is called Zionism, to change the character and personality of the Jew, such that after they changed Jews from people like me to the model of the Jew to somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu or Ariel Sharon, everybody will love the Jews now. There won't be any more anti-Semitism. That was the plan. Didn't work out that way, did it? But that was the plan. So they decided to change the definition of a Jew and to teach that the definition of a Jew is being part of a nationality. According to Shlomo Avineri, Heinrich Gretz was the person most responsible for this. But this is, in the words of Israel's own judiciary, the cornerstone of Zionism, that the Jews are a nationality, not just merely a religious collective. And therefore, there has to be a Jewish nation. And Israel, by its nation-state law of 2018, is not the country of the Israeli citizens. It is the country of the Jewish nationality.
Right.
This cannot be underemphasized. Cannot be overemphasized. Although Israeli citizens have Israeli citizens' civil rights, whether you're Jewish or not, whatever those rights are, but only Jews have self-determination rights in Israel. That means so long as only Jews can control Israel. Because, and it's very important to understand, Israel doesn't look at it as discriminatory. Israel looks at it the same way America is designed for American citizens. And if non-citizens get less rights than citizens, that's not discriminatory because, well, this is America, and America is made for the Americans, right?
Right.
Italy is made for the Italians. Turkey is made for the Turks, but Israel is made for the Jews. Okay? That's the thing. They look at Jews the same way America would look at American citizens. Now, you're going to ask me, hey, but wait, there's a difference. You could become an American citizen by naturalization, right?
Right.
How do you become a Jew? Well, the answer is you convert, and then you could become a Jew. But wait, according to Zionism, being Jewish has nothing to do with a religion. It's also a religion, but you can be an atheist and be a Jew, right? According to them, being a Jew is a nationality. You don't have to be religious, but the only way to become part of this nationality is to convert. And not only that, but you have to convert this is Israeli law, according to an Orthodox Jewish conversion, because the chief rabbinate says that, and I agree with them. That's the different denominations of Judaism. There's, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Jews for Jesus. Zionism is also another denomination of Judaism. We would consider it a different religion. So it's a contradiction. Zionism has this idea that Israel is the country of the Jews, but yet the only way to become a member of this Jewish nationality is to convert with a religious conversion that the founders of Israel and Netanyahu and most Israeli who are non-religious don't even believe in that religion. But we're not done yet. You can be an atheist and be considered a Jew regarding the law of return. Oh, you see, that's the second part.
Right.
While Israel is not the country of the non-Jews in Israel, it is the country of the Jews not in Israel. So Israel claims to be my state because I'm part of the Israeli nationality, the Jewish nationality, which means that Netanyahu says that he's my prime minister. He represents all the Jews. He's the leader of the Jews. It's been said he's prime minister of the Jews. Jonathan Pollard, the spy who was convicted of spying on Israel, on America for Israel. He went to jail, did his time, moved to Israel. He had said not long ago that he would advise American Jews to spy on America for Israel, because
Wow.
you see, I am part of the I'm part of the Jewish nationality, and Israel is my country. Now, I don't have voting rights there. But that's what Israel considers me. I'm going to read you. I have over here a paper. World Zionist Organization, Jewish Agency, Status Law, 1952. Okay, 1. The state of Israel regards itself as the creation of the entire Jewish people. So, number one, it is not. It is the creation of the Zionists. It decided that it's the creation of the entire Jewish people. Theodor Herzl, in his book, The Jewish State, decided, based on some ancient Roman law called Negotiorum Gestio, that the Zionists have a legal right to speak in the name of all Jews. They're the leaders of the Jews. Article 5 in this status law. The mission of gathering in the exiles, meaning all the Jews should move to Israel, which is the central task of the state of Israel and the Zionist movement in our days, requires constant effort by the Jewish people in the diaspora. Therefore, the state of Israel expects the cooperation of all Jews as individuals and groups in building up the state and assisting the immigration to it of the masses of people, and regards the unity of all sections of Jewry as necessary for this purpose, which means Israel decided they're my country. It expects loyalty from me in various degrees. It decided it's my country, but at the same time, I'm part of this. By the way, who's my country? Is my country Israel? Or is my country America?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like,
yes,
it trends in this kind of trope of dual loyalty, but they are trending in that. Like,
yes,
it's not us. It's not me. They are effectively saying,
you're right. You're 100% right. Israel is Zionism. This is the ideology of Zionism, and there were people who actually brought Israel to court a few times, saying we want an Israeli nationality because we're a nation, we're a country, we have our own culture, we have our own language. We're not American Jews, we're not French Jews, we are Israelis. Israel is a nation, and the court ruled against them consistently. And they said a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is that is the cornerstone of Zionism, that the Jews are a nationality, and Israel was made for the Jewish nationality. Also, it's a weird thing, they said. A person can only be of one nationality. So if we make a Israeli nationality, then the Jewish Israelis will have to choose whether they're part of the Jewish nationality or the Israeli nationality. That would divide up the Jewish Israelis, and will also push a wedge between the Israeli Jews and the Jews outside of Israel, but we really want to be one people. Right. So yes, it is an anti-Semitic trope. And listen to this. Speaking of which, I'm sure you've heard the Zionists have this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, right?
Right.
Or it's usually, okay, now they'll give you all sorts of whacked out arguments as to why they believe this to be true. But if you want to know the official Israeli political position, Israeli politicians, Israeli leadership position on this, here it is. I have in front of me two things that I want to read to you, which really basically say the same thing. One is inside a book by Benjamin Netanyahu. It's called A Place Among the Nations, okay? That's him in the back. Now, A Place Among the Nations means that the Jews now are not merely a religious collective. They have a place among the nations. They're a nationality too. That's the whole idea of Zionism, okay? On page 88, in case anybody wants to find it, he says like this. The sham disclaimer of, quote, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist, is the equivalent of, I'm not anti-American, I just think the United States should not exist. So in other words, just like you cannot say that I'm pro-American identity, but I'm against the existence of America, you can't say, I want France not to exist, but I want the French national identity to exist. You cannot say, I'm against the existence of Israel, but I want the Jewish identity to exist.
But those aren't the same thing. Like
they're not the same thing, but Zionism says they are. Now, one more thing. On Israel's website, we have a website, our government has a website, .gov. In Israel, they have the same kind of thing. .co.il. It was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now it's in the embassy part of the website. There's an article there written by Victor Lieberman, and he explains what a Jewish state means. Because what is a Jewish state, right? Does it mean a state with a majority of Jews? Does it mean a state that has a right to guarantee a majority of Jews? It's certainly not a state that runs according to Jewish values or Jewish religious law. It's certainly not a state that, I don't even know what Jewish state is, but they explain what it is, okay? Here's what it says. The term Jewish state refers primarily to nationality. Since their emergence in antiquity, the Jewish people have constituted a nation, a people, and a civilization anchored in the basic aspects of their identity, such as Judaism and the Hebrew language. Now, none of this is true, but listen to the money quote. Now it comes. Israel is to the Jewish people what France is to the French people, Ireland is to the Irish, and Japan is to the Japanese. Meaning, without Zionism, Israel would be to the Israeli people what France is to the French people and Japan is to the Japanese. Zionism says no, Israel is not the country of the Israelis. Israel is the country of the Jewish nation. Two things Zionism says. You want to know what Zionism is? I think I heard on, it was your show or someone else's show, that you ask the Zionists, they themselves won't even explain what it is because they have 1,000 different definitions and 1,000 different types and 1,000 different definitions of a Jewish state. But all Zionisms, and this is Israel's judiciary, their judges in the Supreme Court said, the cornerstone of Zionism and their politicians, their prime minister, their own government website, that all Zionism says the Jews are a nationality and two, Israel is the state of that nationality. So that's Zionism. Zionism means that I, as an American Jew, whose family is from Poland. On my mother's side, they're from England and Russia. I live in America. I practice the Jewish religion and my language, I speak English as a first language, and I speak the rabbinic Hebrew. And by the way, it's not the same as modern Hebrew. Modern Hebrew, I really have a very hard time understanding. Yeah. In the same way, I can understand it the same way I understand German, because Yiddish is a dialect of German and I understand Yiddish. So I understand modern Hebrew in the sense that it's a dialect, but it's not really the same language. No. I have no interest in anything. I have nothing interest in having to do with Israel, yet Israel claims it's my country. That's Zionism. And to give you one more idea of what it is, I have an article over here we had the Israeli politicians, we had Israel's websites, we had the Israeli judiciary. Now we're going to have the Israeli thinkers. The Israelis actually have think tanks and people sitting down, trying to figure out how could we make Zionism stronger? How could we redefine our narrative and our story? But the main thing is they want to take over Jewish identity. They want to make, like they said, Israel is to the Jewish people, not what Israel is to what Japan is to the Japanese and France is to the French. Now, what about an American Jew like me? What connection do I have to Israel? So I have an article over here by Stephen Bain. He's one of the Zionist thought leaders. This is from a journal called the Jewish Political Studies Review, spring 2008. The article is titled, American Jewry and the State of Israel, How Intense the Bonds of Peoplehood. The answer really is zero, none. The bond of peoplehood between American Jewry and the State of Israel is zero. But that's not what Zionism says, and that's not what Zionism wants. So I just want to read you a couple of sentences from this article.
Yeah, please.
The Birthright Israel program, you know about that, right?
Yeah, right.
Articulated both the centrality of Israel to American Jewish identity. You hear that? The centrality of Israel to American Jewish identity and Israel's responsibility to preserve Jewish continuity in North America.
Oh, wow. ...
Jews and Americans alike need to understand the centrality of Israel to the identification of Jews as Jews with the broader Jewish people, given both the place of Zion, meaning the land, the Holy Land, in Jewish history and thought, and listen to this, the transformation in the Jewish tradition wrought by Zionism. You hear that? Zionism made a transformation in Judaism. The American Jewish-Israeli relationship cannot rest solely on strategic interests, or even for that matter, shared values. Instead, the relationship rests on being a Jew and being part of the Jewish people in the 21st century. In that sense, denying the Jews the opportunity to support Israel is to not deny them the opportunity to be themselves.
Wow.
Now, this is
Wow.
one thing. Zionism means that the Jewish identity, that's okay. Zionism, you know, anything with the suffix ism, it's either like if it's an ideology, communism,
Yeah.
feminism, right? It's something that could be opposed. It doesn't
Right.
always mean that, but
Right.
it's an ideology. Zionism is an ideology, like everything. Judaism is an ideology. Atheists oppose Judaism. They're not
Right.
anti-Semites. I think they're untutored, but they're not anti-Semites. There are people who oppose Judaism because they don't like, let's say, the women's role in Judaism, or they don't like animal sacrifices. They're not anti-Semites.
Right. Well,
They're just
they equal
whatever.
opportunity.
They're just
I mean, even Christianity, they would be against Christianity too.
100%.
They equal opportunity, yeah.
100%. You know, different people have different. I'm against certain religions. You know,
Yeah.
I don't like certain religions, but that doesn't make them anti the person. A religion is an ideology, but ideologies are not limited to religion. There are people who are against communism. Communism is responsible for ideologies in general are responsible for so many deaths. Stalin killed millions and millions of people, right? So, but I have nothing against. If I didn't like the Soviet Union. I wish the Soviet Union did not exist, and no longer does it exist. That doesn't mean I had anything against the people who live in the Soviet Union.
Right.
On the contrary,
You hate Russians, right? Exactly.
I don't hate Russians because they're
Exactly.
Russians. And if somebody doesn't like Zionism, and if somebody doesn't even want Israel to exist because they think that Israel would be better off if it would be something else, the Israelis would be better off if it would be something else. I say the problem with Israel is that Israel does not exist. You see, here's the shtick that they did.
Oh,
the
that's
problem
such a good
is
point.
that
Look
they
at-
have something called a Jewish state.
You have to
Instead
highlight
of
that,
saying,
'cause
no,
that's a
Israel
really good
should
point.
not exist, all the anti-Zionists should say, no, we want Israel to exist, country of the Israelis. We want Japan to be Israel to be to the Israelis what Japan is to the Japanese. We want Israel to be the country of the Israelis. We want to get rid of two laws. We want to get rid of the nation state law of 2018 that says Israel is the country of all the Jews, meaning not the Israelis. We want to get rid of the status law of 1952 that says Israel. This is just nonsense. It's not even a law. The state of Israel regards itself as the creation of the entire Jewish people. We want Israel to wake up and smell the coffee and get out of their stupor and realize that Israel is the country of the Israelis. The problem is that Israel is run by an ideology called Zionism. And Zionism has to do with the relationship between Israel and the Jewish people. There's a mistake out there. And here's where people are getting it wrong. And here's the answer to your question, Jamal. People look always as Zionism in terms of its relationship to the Palestinians, right? And in terms of the non-Jews in Israel. That's wrong. That's wrong. Well, the Palestinians just ended up in the wrong place in the wrong time. They just ended up in Israel's way. Zionism per se, inherently, doesn't have anything against Palestinians. It's just that, put it this way, if Israel was a land without a people for people without a land, which it wasn't, and by the way, it wasn't these Jewish Zionists that invented that slogan, it was the Christian evangelicals. Lord Shaftesbury and Alexander Keith were saying it in the 1940s before any Jewish Zionist ever thought of it. If it were true, it would be fine. They wouldn't. But the problem is that Zionism would still have its relationship with the Jewish people, and Zionism wanting to deform Jewish people, the Jewish identity, wanting to deform Judaism, wanting to change the Jews into a nationality. That's really what Zionism is. The Palestinians are only caught in the crossfire between Judaism and Zionism. And yes, it's true. I speak to Palestinian or pro-Palestinian people all the time, and they tell me, look, all we want is them to stop bombing us. That's all we want. Just give us a state or something like that. That's fine. I, as an American Jew, are no less involved or no more involved with Israel's conflict with the Palestinians, and I want people to understand this, than I am with China's the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah.
I'm Jewish. I'm not Israeli. The idea that because I'm Jewish, therefore I have some standing to tell Israel what to do, is Zionism itself.
Right.
And if you want to destroy Zionism, and I do, I would want to destroy. Here's a thought experiment. And I always tell people, a lot of people who think they're anti-Zionist are not. They are pro-Palestinian, but they're not anti-Zionist. Here's the thought experiment. Let's assume that the Israelis and the Palestinians would get two states, right? Let's say there'll be two-state solution, in theory. I know it's not happening, but in theory. And let's assume even the Palestinians get 90% of the land, and Israel ends up with 10% of land in the Negev desert. And let's even assume, in our fantasy world, that the Israelis are happy and the Palestinians are happy, right? Everybody's happy. Israel's happy, Palestinians are happy. Are these anti-Zionists happy? Well, sure, because there's no problem anymore with no conflict. Well, guess what? I'm not happy, because that Israel that exists in the Negev desert still claims to be my country.
Right.
Netanyahu still claims to be my prime minister. It claims I'm not a real American. It still has a dual loyalty trope. It still claims to be the state of the Jewish nationality. It still has a minority, let's say 20 or 30% of non-Jews in that little state of Israel, that Israel is not their country and they have no rights to self-determination in Israel. And that's Zionism. Zionism is an ideology. And that ideology happens in happenstance, not inherently conflict with the people in the land, the Palestinians. So if you want to destroy Zionism, we need to first define, like the Zionists say about anti-Semitism, about this nonsensical IHRA definition, their slogan. If you want to fight it, you have to define it.
They pushed that to Congress, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's true regarding Zionism. If you want to fight it, you need to define it. And we need to define Zionism. Zionism, look, the problem with the Gaza and Lebanon, that's one issue.
Right.
But we should understand that Zionism, if we want to get rid of Zionism, and I do, as a Jew, even if the Palestinians would be happy, even if there would be nothing, Zionism over here is what makes Israel different than all other countries in the world. I must emphasize, there is not a single country in the world like this. It's not merely an ethno-state. People don't like ethno-states. I got that. But Israel's more than an ethno-state. I'm sure you've heard that the Zionist talking point, well, there's only one Jewish state and 24, 25, 28 Muslim states or Arab states. That's not true. You see, once you understand what Zionism is, all of Zionism falls apart, because Israel claims to be not merely an ethno-state for Jewish people that is discriminatory, let's say, or gives more rights to Jews. Right. No, it claims to represent all the Jews all over the world. It claims to be the state of the Jews all over. It claims to represent me. It claims to speak in my name. Now, there is not a single Arab state that's an Arab state in the sense that Israel claims to be a Jewish one. There's not a single Muslim state that claims to be a Muslim state in the sense that Israel says it's a Jewish one. Because there's not a single Muslim state that claims to be the nation state of Muslims all over the world. Saudi Arabia is the state of the Saudi Arabians. It may be discriminatory. It may run on with Muslim law, Sharia, whatever. That's one thing. But Israel is different than that. Israel, whatever laws it has, claims that the citizenship structure, the actual national structure of Israel is different than every other country in the world, because Israel claims to represent Jews elsewhere. Israel claims to be the nation state, not of its citizens, of some imaginary Jewish nationality that exists only in their fantasies. And if you want to fight Zionism, we have to fight these illogical inconsistencies. We have to say, as you just did, Israel is a dual loyalty trope. What we want is to get the Jewishness out of Israel. We want, you know what we want? We want even to get, let's not even say it that way, because then they'll say you want to get rid of that.
But I know what you mean,
Jewish state. What you want is, you want to say, you want Israel to exist as a nationality. You want those 22 appellants that brought Israel to court to say, we want an Israeli nationality. We want the judges to rule in their favor. We want Israel to exist as a democracy for all its citizens, the state of the Israelis. Every Israeli citizen should have the exact same rights, self-determination rights. And then once you eliminate that idea that Israel's the state of the Jewish nation, then put it this way, Israel claiming to be the Jewish state is not good for anybody. Nobody benefits. You know, I was talking to a liberal Zionist yesterday, and he was taught when he was growing up in Israel that all Israel wants is a safe place for the Jews. I said, that's what they taught you, but they lied. It's not true. What they wanted was to transform the Jews into a nationality, change their personalities, change their values from religious to national. They actually, I don't know if we have time to describe this, but they wanted to overcorrect for the Jewish personality. Jews had religious values. We were very anti-war, anti-militancy. We were very pro-peace. We were we were like a priestly class, you know, like monks, I guess you can compare us to. We sat a whole day praying and studying our law, like many religious people. We do go out and make a living, but the Jews were never interested, the religious Jews, in art, in architecture, sports, things like that. There's nothing wrong with those things if you're not of the priestly class. If you're a person who's obligated to fulfill 7 Noahide laws, go right ahead. But the Jews are committed, as it says in Psalms. King David said, there's one thing I want from God. Now there's a king of a country. He said, I only want one thing I ask of God. I want to sit in the house of the Lord all my life, to bask in the splendor of God and to continuously visit his holy house. All the Jews wanted was to be able to practice their religion, study, pray, and, you know, socially, culturally, that's our culture. That's what we wanted. America's the best place for us, like in the history of the world. But the Zionists said, no, we don't want that. We want to be, well, a place among the nations. We want to be one of the nations. And by the way, the word nations in Hebrew means 2 things. It means like nations, like countries, but it means non-Jews. The word goyim, which means Gentiles and non-Jews, literally means the nations. When the Jews refer to Gentiles, it really means the nations, meaning the Jews are not a nationality. That's actually what it means. When that there are the nationalities, and then there are the Jews. We adopt the nationality of whatever country we have. We are referred to as a holy goy. It refers to Jews as a goy. That means, like, it doesn't mean a nation that happens to be holy in the political sense. It means, you know, like they have a alleged killer. It doesn't mean he's a killer, but the adjective describes what type of killer. It limits the meaning of the word killer, changes it. So when we say the Jews are a holy people or a holy nation, it means that we are a nation only through our religion. That's what it means.
I see.
Or like a 4 diamond, which means the opposite of a real one. You could say a white, clear diamond, a hard diamond, which means it's a diamond, but a certain type. Or you could say a 4 diamond. You can say a serial killer, which means he's a certain type of killer. Or you could say an alleged killer, which means he's not really a killer, he's just accused. And when we say the Jews are a holy nation, it means the holiness is what makes them into a nation. But in any case, the Jews had certain values, and the Zionists decided that it's because the Jews are that way. They're not interested in higher secular education. They're not interested in being, there's no such thing as Jewish sports. There's no such thing as Jewish architecture, Jewish poetry and literature, although the Jews had compulsory education for 2,000 years, whereas in Europe, it started in France, compulsory education in the mid-1800s. The Jews never made fiction literature. They never made secular poetry. And the reason is because our lives were dedicated to our religion. There's plenty of books and literature out there about religious poetry and biblical commentary and exegesis and stuff like that. But the Zionists decided, of course, people hate the Jews, and they even hate us. We assimilated Jews, they hated because that's the image of the Jew. What we want to do is we want to change the Jews. We want to re-educate them. We want to not only rebrand them, we want to change the definition of a Jew. We want to make them not aspire to religious and holy values. We want them to aspire to be a strong nation, have a strong army. Don't be so pacifist. On the contrary, be militant. This is what the Zionists actually said. And I'm talking about particularly the right-wing Zionists who are in the government today, guys like Jabotinsky and the like. That was their goal, to change the Jewish character. Zionism, this is all Zionism. It's an assault on the traditional Jewish character, traditional Jewish values, traditional Jewish lifestyle. In fact, Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was the mentor of today's Likud government, Netanyahu, said that Jabotinsky he's a student of Jabotinsky, considers himself. He created their Revisionist Party, which morphed step by step into today's Likud. He made a eulogy on Theodor Herzl in 1904 when Herzl died. And he said that what makes Herzl a real Zionist, he then called them Ivrim, Hebrews, because in Hebrew is more of you come from the land of the Hebrews rather than the religious aspect of being Jewish. He said, what makes him a Zionist? Because if you want to know what a Zionist is, we don't have a model yet to compare it to. We don't have, it's not like the Chinese, it's not like the Buddhists, it's not like the Boston Red Sox. If you want to know what a Zionist is, take a Zhid. Zhid was a derogatory term for Jew, like a kike. Take a kike. He meant a religious Jew. And take every character trait he has and imagine its diametrical opposite. That's a Zionist. A Zhid is ugly. A Zionist is handsome. A Zhid is weak. A Zionist is strong. A Zhid is cowardly. A Zionist is courageous. A Zhid runs, and a Zionist knows how to command, etc., etc.
A Zionist is anti-Semitic in the way that
a Zionist is the opposite of a Jew. It's the biggest anti-Semitic. It set as its goal it's anti-Semitic, and it wanted it to, at the same time, it wanted to fight anti-Semitism by destroying Semitism, and by that I mean Jews. It wanted to destroy Jew hate by destroying the Jews and making them into one of the nations, one of the Goyim, so that the Jews will no longer be hated. Theodor Herzl, do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. Theodor Herzl, in the last page of his book, The Jewish State, said that it's not, the early Zionists did not say we want a safe place for Jews. Instead, they said, we want to end anti-Semitism. And Herzl, at the last page of his book, the climax of his book, The Jewish State, which is kind of the founding ideology of political Zionism, he said that once Zionism gets off the ground, he said, we don't have to wait to make a Jewish state to end anti-Semitism. As soon as people find out that Zionism gets off the ground, as soon as they understand, on the radio waves, as soon as people understand, as soon as they hear that the Jews are changing their personalities and they're going to be different, what they aspire to, anti-Semitism will end in a snap. That's what he said. As soon as we become Zionists, anti-Semitism will end. Yeah, if you're like Yaakov Shapiro, there'll be a lot of anti-Semitism. But as soon as you're like Benjamin Netanyahu, Ariel Sharon, as soon as you're like Smotrich or Ben Gvir, then the whole world will love you. Well, how'd that work out for you, Theodore?
That's like saying, if a black man can be white, he could be, we can get rid of racism.
It's exactly what it is.
Bizarre. Yeah.
So just imagine that you had some black leaders that would say, we want to fight racism. Here's what we do. We have to teach the blacks we got to get them bleach, so they look white. We got to get them language training to get rid of any remnants of an accent that they may have. We got to get rid of their music. We got to get rid of their culture. We got to teach them European culture, and we got to make them like whites, and then nobody will hate them. So is that racist or is that anti-racist? Which is it? That's Zionism. That's Zionism. We don't like anti-Semitism. So in order to do that, in order to get rid of anti-Semitism, we got to change the Jews into the nations. We got to make them one of the nations. That's the idea.
In that is self-hatred.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is. Exactly. And if there were people who actually wrote about Herzl, pointed out what a self-hating Jew he was. He once wrote an essay. It's called Mauschel. Mauschel was an old German, also an anti-Semitic nickname for Jews, also kind of like kike. And he was talking about the anti-Zionist Jews in his days, and Herzl died in 1904. He was saying about how the Jews are a different race than the Zionists. They're different people. He says the anti-Zionist Jews are a different race, different people than the Zionists.
Right.
He said they don't want anything to do with us. They're doing us a favor. You know the difference between a Jew. Now he's changing the identity of a Jew to the Zionist. Difference between a Jew and a Mauschel, the anti-Zionist Jew. A Jew appreciates art. Mauschel steals in art. Okay? He had all the anti-Semitic stereotypes. And he said, we're not going to be that anymore. Those are Mauschels, those are kikes. Those are the old-time Jew. And his essay ends by saying that, he said that if Zionism, he says like William Tell, where he had 2 arrows in his quiver.
Right.
And the overlord asked him, why do you have the second arrow? And he says, if the first arrow misses, the second arrow goes, I'm going to shoot you with the second arrow. So Herzl said, Zionism has 2 arrows in its quiver. If Zionism fails, the next arrow is aimed at Mauschel's chest. That's Theodor Herzl.
Wow.
That's how he wanted to end anti-Semitism.
But now they're conflating the two, like, because the way that they're talking about, even in Congress, and even some of the laws that they're trying to pass in various states, that criticism of Zionism as an ideology is by definition anti-Semitic, and
That's
they
right.
have ran with it. I mean,
That's
like,
right.
but because from my point of view, it's an ideology like any other ideology, and from
Of
my point
course
of
it
view,
is.
Israel.
I don't even understand how anybody can have a different point of view unless you accept. In order to fight it, you need to define it. People need to study Zionism. Some of the sources that I just gave you, that's just a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Zionism is a deliberate redefining of Jew from Jew to Zionist. And the truth is, if a Jew and a Zionist is the same, if a Jew, the definition of a Jew is somebody who has a Zionist ideology, because Zionism isn't inherent, you're not born a Zionist,
Right.
then being an anti-Semite is like being an anti-communist. So, and there would be nothing wrong with that. But
Right.
the problem is, everybody knows anti-Semite means that you inherently dislike Jews because they're Jews, as Jews. But the Zionists want to take that word, which is laden with negative and evil connotations, rightfully so, and to misapply it to an ideology. Any ideology in the world can be opposed. You could be wrong for opposing it. You could be stupid for opposing it. You could be suicidal for opposing it, or you could be wise for opposing it. But it doesn't make you a hater.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It doesn't mean you hate people. You can hate an ideology. And if they say even majority of Jews are Zionists, that's not true. If the majority of Jews don't want Israel to be bombed, and I also don't want Israel to be bombed. I want the safety of everybody there. I have relatives who live there.
I want safety and security for
Who
everybody.
were there. I have people I know who were there, or their descendants, their grandchildren, who were there before the state of Israel was.
Right.
The Orthodox community was there before Israel. But by the way, you know what they did exactly 100 years ago, this past June? The Orthodox community did not want Israel to become Israel. They would rather live under the Turks or the British or anybody. And
Really?
the chief rabbi sent a messenger. Chief rabbi didn't speak English. He sent a messenger by the name of Jacob Dahan to the British to tell them, in the name of the Jewish community, we don't want an Israel. We don't want the Zionists. Do you know what happened to him? 100 years ago, this past June, the Zionists, the Zionist Haganah, which later morphed into the IDF, which was the Zionist paramilitary organization, assassinated him. And not a manslaughter, and not even just a murder. It was a political assassination. A guy by the name of Avram Tahomi. You can look this up. He admitted it. They found him, I think, in Hong Kong. And he said, of course, he was putting Zionism in danger. They don't want anybody to know how many Jews oppose Zionism. If Jews would know what Zionism is, if you ask Jews, you want to know if you're a Zionist? Fine. According to Israel's own website, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, according to Avigdor Lieberman, according to their own prime minister, according to their own founding ideology, according to their own Supreme Court, the definition of a Jewish state is that the Jews are a nationality and Israel is a state of nationality. Are you an American? Is Israel your country, or is America your country? If you believe that Israel is not your country, that America is your country, that you're not part of a nationality, that Israel is the country of, you're an anti-Zionist.
Right. Right.
So they said, no, they support Israel, which means they don't want terrorists to come in and blow up, I don't know what, Jewish synagogues. Well, of course not. But they don't even know what Zionism is. But even if the majority of Jews were Zionists, even if that were true, it's like saying, well, the majority of Jews are Democrats, which they are. I'm not, if I oppose the Democratic Party, I'm an anti-Semite.
That is so
The
bizarre.
majority of Zionists aren't even Jews, they're evangelicals. Even
Yeah.
if the majority of people in Russia, in Soviet Russia, agreed with communism, let's assume. I don't have to agree with communism. I could say I wish communism was wiped off the map.
Right.
And that
Doesn't
it's
make you
better when
racist
it
against
has nothing
Russians.
to do with anything. I'm allowed to disagree
Right.
with it. Maybe the majority of the black community are liberals, let's say, okay? And if I am a conservative, I'm not a racist.
Well, Democrats
nothing
like
to
to
do with
think
the other.
otherwise, but yeah.
What?
Right.
What?
Oh, well, the state thing is fascinating to me.
It's
Because you're right.
fascinating. And they want you to be distracted. They want you to keep talking about the Palestinians and the Palestinians and they want you to think. They want you to assume axiomatically that Israel is the state of the Jews, and it's an organic, natural thing for Jews to be in Israel and to have Israel. And now the question is about Zionism, pro-Zionism or anti-Zionism. The question is to balance the aspirations, the rights, and the connection of the Jews to that land versus the aspirations, the rights, and the connection of the Palestinians to that land.
Right.
That's what they want you to think the issue is, but that's not the issue. You want to destroy Zionism. That's not the issue. The Palestinians are only by happenstance on the opposing side of Zionism. In theory, the Zionists could have gotten Uganda or Kenya, and they would have made the Zionist culture. They could have gotten Kenya, and then they would have said Kenya is really the Jewish state and Kenya's Jewish culture. You know what's going on in the New Zealand? What happened in New Zealand Parliament last week?
Oh, about the Maori, I believe.
The Maori, right.
Right.
Zionist Israeli culture is no more Jewish than Maori culture. Okay, they could have taken the Maori culture, the Polynesian, New Zealand culture, and decided, okay, this is Jewish. Israeli culture is no more Jewish than that. They can call it Hak. They can make up they can have a song Haka Nagila. But it's no more Jewish than that. The thing is that Zionism has to be attacked by saying the issue is not the Jewish aspirations versus the Palestinian aspirations, the Jewish connection to the land versus the Palestinian connection to the land. It has nothing to do with Jewish. I have a connection with that land. You know what that connection, my connection with that land is? And I live in Queens. My connection with that land is religious. That is a holy place. That land is closer to God. That is a land that if you enter in it, it's like a synagogue. It's a religious connection in the same way I'm connected to all holy things. But because something's holy does not mean I need to have sovereignty over it.
Right.
But no, their connection is more nationalistic. You see, that's what they did. They changed all the Jewish values, aspirations, and connections, anything Jewish, from religious, from spiritual to political, from religious to nationalistic. And now they have people thinking, okay, so how do we deal with these two peoples that both have national political connection to this land? Fine, but they're not the two peoples. They're not the Jews against the Palestinians. It's the Zionists against the Palestinians. And don't give me any of this. You know what? Yes, terrorism is bad. Killing people is bad. Killing civilians is bad. I got that. But please, nobody should frame this question in terms of, okay, the Jewish national aspiration, the Jewish nation versus the Palestinian nation. There's no state. The issue is not the Jews. The issue is Israel. It's a political issue. It has nothing to do with the Jews. It has to do with Israel versus Palestine, the Israelis versus Palestinians, the Zionists versus the pro-Palestinians, because I want to use an ideology as opposed to a type of people when I make that comparison. And the solution is, here's what everybody should say. Here's what we need to say. The solution is Israel needs to exist as a nationality, as the idea that Israel is the country of the Jews.
Right.
And
Right.
by the way, they don't want people to know this. So much so that on the Israeli passports, even though in the Israeli census, in the Israeli identity cards, there's no such thing as an Israeli nationality, and their Supreme Court and all their courts rule that there's no such thing as an Israeli nationality, nor should there be. On their passports, that is that everybody sees. It says nationality Israeli, but that's just the front. That's not.
So they. Oh wow, that's amazing. So they accept it as an optics in the sense of
imagine what would happen. What people would start questioning if somebody would have an Israeli passport and you see a friend of yours passport and it says nationality Jewish, and say, well,
I see what you mean.
People would start questioning. Well, that is the real Zionism that they see. Zionists, they want to give you this impression that all we want in Israel is we're a bunch of just happy-go-lucky people, regular European liberals who are indigenous, of course, to the Middle East, and all we want is to sit in our Tel Aviv cafes, sipping lattes a whole day, while we're beset by these Islamists that want to conquer the world and implement Sharia law for Islam, and at the same time, the Haredim in Jerusalem who want to implement a theology or a theocracy over here, and all we want, we're just normal people. We're the only people in the Middle East that compete in the Eurovision Song Contest. We're the same as you in America. We're like Americans. We're like everybody else. What are these crazy Middle Eastern people want from us? We have no ideologies. We have no we're secular. We allow religion, freedom of religion, but Zionism itself is just secular. It's just safety for Jews. It's just homecoming. This is all not true.
Yeah,
this is a facade. Zionism is a profound, strong, complex, all-encompassing ideology and worldview. And in order to fight it, you need to define it, and you need to understand it. And there's enough literature out there, enough material that the Zionists themselves have put out for people to understand what's going on over here. And if Zionism is destroyed, it's better for everybody, for the Jews in Israel and out of Israel, for the Palestinians in Israel, for everybody in the world. Zionism doesn't do good for anybody. If it were true that Zionism was designed only to create a safe place for Jews, then all the Zionists today should be thinking of what plan B needs to be. How do we get rid of Israel if that's the only purpose it serves? Because it is the most dangerous place to live as a Jew compared to any other place that Jews as communities live anywhere in the world. Israel's the most dangerous place. Not only that, but statistics show that it increases anti-Semitism all over the world.
Rabbi, I'm going to have to end this because I have to move today and we're coming to the end of the hour. Man, I have appreciated this. This has been a history lesson like nobody's business. And you have clarified stuff that oftentimes doesn't get brought up in media, meaning the U.S. media doesn't really explain that stuff. And they would vote for legislation saying these things are the same, Zionism and Judaism, these things are one-to-one, these things are equal, etc. And like you said, the stuff with I always consider states to be states. I don't like this idea of a Jewish state because from my point of view, it's a state. It's like, any other state. I can criticize it like a state. And adding the religious element to it always makes it, I don't know, it undermines.
It's not, it's not a religious element. Yeah. You see, their definition of Jewish is not religious. See how axiomatic this is in the Western world, how we assume. You heard their definition of Jewish state. Has nothing to do with religion.
Yeah. I mean, because at that point, they're either saying that you who live in America are effectively a part of that state.
That's right.
It's so far reaching in what they're trying to accomplish with it. It's just astonishing. And America, we have given a blank check to it all the way through. Rabbi, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. And I know the audience appreciates this also.
Thanks, Jamal.
Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. He is a speaker, author, and a rabbi. You can watch his videos on YouTube. And he has also the book, The Empty Wagon. You can get it on Amazon and read more about his work on his website. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. All right, guys. I have come to the end of this episode of the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Let me get this straight first before I say anything else. There we are. I've come to the end of this episode. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I want to just damn good lesson. by the rabbi. And again, this is not stuff that is typically taught. This is not stuff that is even talked about in regards to the U.S. media or anything. I mean, you had AOC signing, piling in on the legislation that effectively used a definition, effectively saying that Zionism or criticizing Zionism is anti-Semitic. I mean, some of the stuff that they go with. So I'm damn proud or damn happy that Rabbi could join me. And let's see, do we have any chats? I say all chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. We have a new member, George. What is this? Gimba? Oh God, I'm gonna badly screw this name up. Benga. I'm gonna go with Benga. I'm gonna pretend that the G is silent. Welcome to the family, Benga. Thomas family is expanding, and I want to appreciate all of you guys. Anybody that is watching the show, if you like it, if you enjoy it, give it a like, share the content to anybody that you think will be interested in the content. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I pop in at all times of the day and the night. President Jafar became a YouTube member. President Jafar, welcome to the family. More members of the Thomas family. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. And you guys make this content work. You make it what it is. And yes, deeply appreciate it. When I started this show, God, man, I don't know how many years ago, and just keep puttering along. And at the point where you get the radio job, I didn't necessarily want to give up the show, but it's like you invest so much energy into one that it detracts from the other. And when the show ended, there was still this need and want to communicate, in which case the channel was the obvious source for that. And my thought was, okay, well, you were able to be consistent with the radio show, use that same consistency with the channel itself and grow the channel. This is what you want to do it. Be consistent, get the guests, try to increase the level of guests that you have, get good content, get good conversation, and try to be as accurate as possible in your analysis and be better than the analysis that takes place at the very least on mainstream media. And so I am damn happy that I've been able to get the guests that I've been able to get, and I'm damn happy that you guys have been with me on this trip, on this ride. I will see you guys Monday morning. I don't know if I'll be able to do any shows over the weekend. I got to be honest, I haven't even found a place where I'm going to move yet. Right now, I'm probably going to be bouncing around for a little bit. But on Monday morning, I will be here either way, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Join me, Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Thank you all. I will see you guys at the very least on Monday. But if possible, before then. Have a good weekend, all. And I hope you guys had a fantastic holiday. Signing off.